They say corruption begins as a whisper, a faint pressure behind the ribs, a shiver that lingers even when the air is still. But the first thing I remember was not a voice. It was the scent, a sweetness riding atop rot, like a garden drowning beneath its own overgrowth. I smelled it before I ever saw the lesions blooming across the flesh of the fallen, before the first mucus-thick breath rattled through my lungs, before I understood how swiftly Nurgle remakes a life in his own image. Men speak of the plague god as if he is simply decay, a slow, inexorable unraveling. But that is only the mask. The truth feels nothing like dying. It feels suspiciously like belonging, like warmth, like forgiveness. And in that moment, standing within the gutted manufactorum where my regiment once held the line, I began to understand why so many surrender themselves to him long before the fever takes their bodies. But this story is not about surrender alone. It is about the struggle that claws beneath every heartbeat when corruption presses in. It is about the moment the human soul understands it is being hunted, not by claws or fangs or demons shaped from nightmares, but by an affection so perverse it will not take no for an answer. And in a galaxy where hope often burns out faster than promethium, the question becomes painfully simple. How do you fight a god whose greatest weapon is the comfort you never receive in life? If you want to walk deeper into this descent, if you want to understand what happens when Nurgle's shadow settles on your skin and in your bones, stay with me. And while you're here, lend your support by liking this video, sharing it with those who whisper about the darkness between the stars, and subscribing so our journey through the Imperium's hidden corners can continue. Your presence strengthens this chronicle more than you know. They say corruption begins as a whisper, barely louder than a breath, carried through the cracks of a dying world. At first, you might mistake it for the murmur of wind slipping through rusted hablock shutters, or the groan of a manufactorum cooling after another cycle of exhaustion. But there's a moment, sharp, unmistakable, when you realize the whisper is not outside you at all. It is inside your lungs, inside your blood, inside the slow pulse of your own weary heart. A warmth where no warmth should be, a softness blooming beneath the ribs, a promise of relief offered in the voice of something that should not know your name, yet somehow does. I felt it long before I admitted it. Before the first lesion, before the first fever, before the first dream in which a man-sized shadow waddled from the dark with a smile too wide and a kindness too heavy to lift. A strange comfort trailing behind it like incense. Some part of me knew what it meant, but denial is a stubborn shield. You cling to it even as it crumbles, even as the rot beneath your skin begins to hum, even as every step draws you deeper into an embrace whispered across the warp since time forgot its own beginning. This is the quiet moment before a life ends and another begins. This is the truth few survive long enough to voice. This is what it means when Nurgle sets his hand upon you. If you've ever wandered the darker paths of the Imperium's forgotten stories, if these kinds of journeys through shadowed corners of the galaxy linger with you long after the screen fades, let your support be the torch that keeps these tales alive. Like, share, and subscribe so more wanderers can find their way here. Now, follow closely. The path ahead is soft underfoot, and something waits within the moss. Chapter 1. The First Sickness. I used to measure my days by the sound of the morning sirens that rolled through the manufactorum stacks, rattling the thin metal walls of my hab like distant thunder. That sound meant the city still breathed, that the forges still burned, that the Imperium still demanded its due. Life was simple beneath that rhythm. Hard, unforgiving, but predictable. You woke, you worked, you slept. You coughed black soot into a cracked sink and told yourself it was only residue from the ventilation grids. You watched machines older than your ancestors spit sparks and smoke and reminded yourself that survival was a privilege granted to the obedient. You learned not to ask questions, not to look for meaning in a place that had none. The first cough came during a night shift. I remember the taste of ozone in the air, the heat of the great furnaces pulsing through my gloves, the vibration of the assembly lines trembling along the metal decking. Nothing unusual, But then a pressure tightened in my chest, subtle at first, like a hand resting gently beneath the sternum. I thought it was fatigue. I thought it was the usual strain of a life spent inhaling spoiled air. But when the cough tore free, it echoed differently in my own ears, wet, heavy, as though something deep inside me had been stirred awake. I spat onto the floor, expecting flecks of soot. Instead, a thin smear of yellow clung to the metal grating, glistening in the harsh manufacturum lights. For a heartbeat, I simply stared at it, unwilling to believe it had come from me. Infection meant quarantine. Quarantine meant disappearance. Every worker knew it. So I wiped my mouth with the back of my glove and forced myself back into rhythm. But the warmth lingered. It pulsed beneath my ribs, spreading slowly, like embers buried in ash beginning to glow. I felt sweat slip down my spine despite the chill drafts that cut through the assembly hall. The machines roared around me, drowning out thought, but I could still feel that soft pressure in my lungs. Not pain. Not exactly. It was something else. Something almost gentle. By the end of the shift, the warmth had grown into a subtle hum beneath my skin. Every breath felt thick, as though the air itself had weight. As I stepped out into the dawn, the city's smoke-choked sky glowing dull orange with rising sun, I realized I could smell something sweet beneath the usual industrial rot. A faint, earthy scent, like wet soil after rain. Impossible. Nothing grew in this district, nothing except rust. I walked home with that scent following me, weaving through the smog, drifting between the crowds of exhausted workers. No one else seemed to notice it. Faces sagged in fatigue, eyes deadened by repetition, bodies moving with the mechanical rhythm of survival. Yet with every step, the scent grew stronger, curling around my thoughts. Familiar in a way I couldn't place, comforting in a way it had no right to be. That night, the fever began. It crept over me slowly, like a blanket drawn across the body by unseen hands. The hab's recycled air felt soft and warm, almost soothing as I lay on my narrow cot. The ache in my bones softened into a pleasant heaviness, and the pressure in my lungs became a slow, rhythmic pulse, matching the beating of my heart. I tried to tell myself it was only exhaustion, that I'd wake in the morning with the sickness gone, but a part of me already knew better. I drifted between sleep and waking for hours. Dreams tugged at the edges of consciousness, shadows moving through a fog-shrouded garden, shapes that waddled rather than walked, heavy-footed yet graceful, their silhouettes rounded and impossibly soft. I heard distant chuckles, warm and rumbling, like an elder telling stories by firelight. The sound should have frightened me. Instead, it soothed. When I jerked awake, drenched in sweat, the warmth inside me had grown into something unmistakably alive. My skin tingled as though tiny roots pressed outward from within. My breath left trails of mist in the air despite the rising heat of my fever. The earthy scent from earlier now clung to my sheets, thick and sweet, flooding the cramped room. For a moment, I thought I heard a whisper, low, affectionate, almost sympathetic, curling inside my skull like a murmur through leaves. I pressed my palms against my ribs, feeling the slow throb beneath them. The warmth answered my touch, blooming gently as if responding to my heartbeat. Something inside me was waking, and I realized, with a clarity colder than ice, that this was no sickness the medici could name. It was a beginning, a first breath in a body that no longer belonged to me alone. Morning came without light. The sky above the hab blocks hung low with industrial smoke, turning dawn into a smear of gray that pressed close against the windows. I rose slowly, my limbs heavy with a comfortable sort of numbness, as though someone had wrapped me in thick cloth during the night. The fever still burned beneath my skin, but the pain I expected never arrived. Instead, every movement felt strangely cushioned, muted at the edges. Even the cold metal floor beneath my bare feet seemed warmer, almost soft. When I splashed water onto my face, the reflection staring back through the cracked mirror stopped me cold. My eyes looked different, not infected or bloodshot, but relaxed. as if the exhaustion carved into them over years of labor had been gently smoothed away. The skin beneath them held a faint flush, touched by something that felt like vitality, even as I knew it was anything but. And there along the edge of my jaw, a small patch of discoloration, pale green, like the first hint of mold on old bread. I touched it with trembling fingers. The texture was wrong. It wasn't raised or irritated. It wasn't tender. It felt soft, too soft, as though the skin beneath it had loosened, becoming pliant. The warmth pulsed again from deep inside my chest, answering my touch with a slow, affectionate swell, like something stirring in its sleep. I ripped my hand away. For the first time since the symptoms began, fear managed to break through the haze of comfort that clung to me. Not fear of death. Death was a familiar, distant shadow in a place like this. No, this fear felt deeper, older, as though it came from a part of the soul meant to recognize when something vast and patient had taken notice. A pounding knock rattled my hab door before I could gather my thoughts. Shift siren. Mandatory attendance. Missing a cycle meant disciplinary review, and disciplinary review often meant disappearing into the lower levels, never to return. I wrapped my scarf tighter around my face to hide the discoloration and stepped into the corridor. The halls of the hab block were already alive with movement. Hundreds of workers shuffled toward the lifts, their boots clanging on the grated floors. The air smelled of coolant, sweat, and recycled water. But beneath it all, I could still sense that sweet, earthy undertone following me like a shadow. No one else reacted to it. No one looked at me twice. And yet, the warmth inside me seemed to swell with the nearness of the crowd, as though it recognized them, or hungered for them, or pitied them. On the transport tram to the manufactorum, a man collapsed onto the floor a few seats away. Overwork, dehydration, common enough. The others barely spared him a glance. But when his coughing fit subsided, I saw a thin thread of yellow spittle dangling from his lip, shimmering faintly in the dim carriage lights. My breath caught. The warmth inside me flickered, as though curious. When a man wiped his mouth and looked up, his eyes met mine. There was something familiar in them. Not recognition, resignation. A mirror of the quiet acceptance forming in the back of my mind. I turned away, gripping the cold metal rail until my knuckles whitened. My heart pounded, not from exertion, but from the certainty that whatever had touched me was beginning to spread. The manufactorum hit me like a wave of heat. Machines roared with mechanical fury, rivers of molten metal poured through reinforced channels, and the air shimmered with particulate haze. But today, the noise felt distant, softened by the feverish hum inside my skull. My co-workers' movements blurred slightly, as though a thin veil separated me from the world. Even the harsh clang of servitors along the upper walkways sounded muffled, like echoes heard through thick cloth. When I reached my assembly station, my supervisor, Flint, a man carved from years of labor and bitterness, paused as he passed behind me. "You look pale," he muttered through his respirator, though pale was not the word he needed. His eyes lingered on the edges of my scarf, with a faint green tint peeked through despite my efforts. "I'm fine," I said, though my voice felt foreign in my own throat, too smooth, too calm. He grunted, unconvinced, but kept moving. No one wanted to file an illness report unless absolutely necessary. Illness meant paperwork. Paperwork meant attention from the administratum. No one wanted attention. I worked in silence, my hands moving out of habit, even as my thoughts drifted. Each shift of my muscles produced a strange sensation, as if something beneath my skin shifted with me, adjusting, settling, growing. There were moments, fleeting, terrifying, when I thought I felt movement just beneath the ribs, a slow ripple, as though something living traced its fingers along the inside of my bones. Midway through the cycle, the smell intensified. Sweet, warm, putrid beneath the sweetness, like fruit left too long in a sealed box. I leaned against my station, breath shallow, and for the briefest moment, I thought I heard it again. A chuckle, low, gentle, proud. It came not from outside, but from the warm hollow behind my heartbeat. And I realized the truth no one ever says aloud. Corruption doesn't begin with decay. It begins with affection. The rest of the shift unfolded in a blur of heat and mechanical thunder, yet I moved through it as though submerged in deep water. Every clang of metal, every hiss of steam, every grinding rotation of the manufacturum's ancient gears reached me as if slowed by distance. My co-workers shouted warnings over the roar of the conveyors, but their voices felt muted, swallowed by the feverish hum that filled my skull like a soft, constant resonance. It wasn't painful. If anything, it felt protective, as though the sound cocooned me from the harshness of the world. When the final siren signaled shift's end, I stepped into the cooling corridor with legs that no longer felt entirely my own. The warmth inside me pulsed in gentle waves, rising and falling in rhythm with my breath. I could feel it now with every heartbeat, something expanding, something settling, something growing. The soft flush of fever had become a steady glow beneath my skin, like embers cradled in flesh. As I walked, the workers around me seemed to fade into a gray fog. Their shapes blurred at the edges, their movements sluggish, their eyes empty. I wondered if I had always seen them this way, or if the sickness was reshaping my perception. A man coughed violently into his sleeve as he passed, and the warmth inside me fluttered in response, as though reaching toward him. I gripped the railing to steady myself, knuckles white beneath my grimy gloves. The tram ride home felt longer than usual. The carriage lights flickered overhead, casting the interior in a dim, jaundiced glow. The air tasted stale, heavy with sweat and machine dust. I could sense the breaths of the people around me. Each exhale, a faint ripple of damp heat brushing against my skin. The warmth in my chest responded again, pulsing in subtle synchrony with those breaths, like an echo of something shared rather than solitary. I pressed my forehead against the cold tram window, watching the smokestacks blur past. My reflection appeared faintly in the glass, pale, sunken-cheeked, eyes too calm for what I knew was happening. The small patch of green at my jaw had spread slightly, its edges soft and irregular, like moss creeping across stone. But what seized my breath was the faint, glistening sheen around it, a moisture that wasn't sweat, something thicker, almost luminous in the faint light. I swallowed hard. For the first time, the fear felt real enough to tighten my throat. By the time I reached my hab, the fever had settled deep within me, no longer rising and falling, but steady and confident. I stripped off my gloves with shaking hands, the skin of my palms flushed pink and warm. When I removed my scarf, I felt the air strike the soft patch along my jaw, and the sensation stunned me. It wasn't numb. It wasn't painful. It felt tender, hypersensitive, almost aware, as though the skin itself breathed. A soft whisper brushed the back of my mind. Not words, not quite, more like a feeling tucked into a sound, the way a sigh can carry meaning without language. Comfort, recognition, invitation. No, I muttered under my breath, as if saying it aloud could anchor me. No, this isn't real. But the whisper came again, quieter, affectionate, persistent. I staggered into the washroom, gripping the sink until the metal groaned under my hands. The cracked mirror showed the spreading discoloration in clearer detail now. The greenish tint reached the edge of my neck, threaded with faint yellow veins that pulsed subtly beneath the skin. A thin line of moisture traced down from the corner of the patch, dripping slowly toward my collarbone. I touched it with trembling fingers. It was warm, not fever warm, alive warm. My breath hitched sharply. As my fingertips brushed the surface, a shiver ran through my chest, like a soft laugh rumbling from somewhere deep inside. The warmth ballooned suddenly, flaring through my ribs in a slow wave that left my limbs weak. It wasn't painful. It was comforting, too comforting, as though it sought to soothe the fear even as the cause of that fear spread through me. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over the small metal stool beside the sink. The mirror blurred as dizziness swept over me. I heard my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, steady, strong, but beneath it, another rhythm pulsed in harmony. A second heartbeat. Faint. Distant. Not mine. I collapsed onto the cot, gasping as the fever swelled again. My vision wavered, dark at the edges, and in that dimness, shapes formed behind my eyes. Round silhouettes swaying gently, bellies split with vines and blossoms, eyes gleaming with impossible kindness. They moved through a garden of rotting flowers, each step accompanied by a sound like a contented sigh. One of them turned, looked at me, reached out a swollen hand. I felt its fingers brush my chest, and the warmth inside me answered like a child recognizing a parent. My breath froze, because in that moment, I understood something terrible and tender all at once. Whatever was growing inside me was not growing alone. Something else was growing with it. Something that loved me. Sleep that night was no refuge. It came in fragments, short bursts of blackness interrupted by waves of heat rolling beneath my skin. Each time consciousness dipped, I drifted into that strange, overgrown place my fever had shaped from memory and imagination. The garden again. Fog rolling across soil that pulsed like living meat. Vines coiling through fractured statues. Shapes waddling through soft earth, their shadows stretching long across mounds of glistening rot. The warmth from my chest followed me, even in those dreams, blooming in rhythmic swells that matched every step those silhouettes took. At some point, minutes or hours, I couldn't tell, I woke to the sound of dripping. A slow, measured patter. Liquid meeting metal. Steady. Intentional. For a few breaths, I lay still, staring at the dim ceiling of my hab. The air was thick with that now-familiar sweetness, so strong it coated the back of my tongue. My heartbeat thudded softly beneath my ribs, and beneath it that second rhythm again. Calm. Patient. I turned my head toward the source of the dripping. A small puddle had formed on the floor beside my cot. Pale yellow. Viscous. It glistened faintly like honey under the weak lumen strip overhead. My hand trembled as I reached to touch my jaw, and my fingers came away wet with the same golden fluid. It seeped from the edges of the green-tinted patch, thick and warm, trickling down my neck in slow, deliberate lines. I wiped it away on the blanket, breath shaking. The warmth inside me pulsed in response, almost reproachful, as if chiding me for brushing aside something precious. I'm still me, I whispered, clinging to the words like a lifeline. I'm still me. But even as I said it, the whisper brushed my mind again. A soft murmur curling like steam around a kettle's lip. A feeling wrapped in sound. Not yet. Not fully. Not alone. I staggered to my feet, adrenaline slicing through the fever haze for the first time since this began. I splashed water onto my face, scrubbing at the discolored skin, ignoring the way it tingled beneath my fingertips. I needed clarity. I needed distance. Air. Light. Something real. Outside, the corridor lights flickered, bathing everything in a trembling amber glow. Workers trudged past my door, half-dressed, preparing for another shift. No one looked at me. No one noticed a sheen on my skin or the faint trail of yellow on my collar. The world moved with the same weary routine as always. But the air felt different. Every breath carried that earthy sweetness, weaving through the recycled atmosphere like a ghost. I could almost taste it now, right damp, comforting. I pressed a hand against the wall to steady myself. The metal felt warm under my palm, as though the fever had seeped outward from me into the surroundings. When I reached the lift, the doors slid open with a groan, revealing a crowded platform of workers. Their faces were pale and hollow, eyes sunken from overwork. Yet as I stepped inside, a few of them stiffened subtly. Not turning, not staring, but reacting. I saw a woman press a cloth harder against her face. A man shuffle a step away. A child cling to his guardian's sleeve and bury his face, as though trying to escape a smell the adults pretended not to sense. My heart hammered. Or maybe it wasn't mine this time. The tram ride to the manufactorum felt unbearably long. Every sway of the carriage jostled the warmth in my chest, and each pulse sent waves of tingling sensation through my limbs. My skin crawled with a strange awareness, as if the air brushing against it carried messages only my fever could decipher. Halfway through the ride, A man beside me coughed, a sharp, hacking sound that left flecks of phlegm on his sleeve. As the cough tore through him, the warmth within me surged. A sudden bloom, a rush of heat that stole my breath. I felt my spine stiffen, my fingers twitch, my jaw clench against a wave of sensation that felt disturbingly like anticipation. I struggled to suppress it, forcing my gaze to the tram floor. But when a man coughed again, wet, rattling sick, the warmth inside me responded with a pulse so intense my knees nearly buckled. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't cruelty. It was recognition, as though some part of me understood him now. Understood his weakness. Understood his pain. Understood the quiet, festering misery of long years spent in service to a world that gave nothing back. The fever murmured inside my skull, gentler this time. Not coaxing. Not luring. Comforting. They suffer. You suffered. You don't have to anymore. A shiver ran through me. My throat tightened. When I stepped off the tram and into the manufacturing district, the sky above was a dark smear of smoke and distant firelight. The ground vibrated beneath the weight of colossal machinery. The heat radiating from the smelting pits rolled across my skin in soft, feverish waves. But for the first time, the place felt different. It felt alive. The throbbing heat of the furnaces resonated with the warmth inside my chest. The steam rising from the pipes smelled sweeter than it should. Even the smog curling between the stacks seemed to move with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat and the heartbeat beneath it. I stood there, trembling, staring at the looming silhouette of the manufactorum. And then the whisper came again. Clearer, closer, welcoming. Come home. A soft laugh, deep, warm, impossibly kind, echoed faintly inside me. And for the briefest, most horrifying moment, I wanted to answer. I didn't enter the manufactorum immediately. I lingered outside its massive gates, staring up at the rust-choked arches and the thick columns of smoke belching from the exhaust stacks. The structure loomed like a titan hunched in eternal labor, an iron beast feeding on the strength of those who served it. I'd walked through these gates thousands of times, shoulders bent, lungs aching, mind numb. But now something inside me stirred with unfamiliar awareness. The manufactorum's heat no longer felt oppressive. It felt familiar, almost sympathetic, as though the furnaces themselves recognized the fever blossoming beneath my skin. The rhythmic thump of stamping presses, once deafening, now mingled with the steady pulses inside my chest until the two became indistinguishable. Every vibration in the ground echoed inside me. Every plume of steam curled with the same strange sweetness that haunted my breath. The warmth within me swelled again, not violently, slowly, invitingly, like a hand placed on my back to guide me forward. I stepped through the gates. Inside, the air hit me like a wave of humid breath. Steam poured from cracked vents, pooling around the catwalks in drifting clouds. The constant grind of conveyor belts shook the metal flooring beneath my boots. Workers moved like shadows, hunched and silent, each lost to the crushing rhythm of survival. But I could feel something else gliding beneath the noise, something soft, persistent, like the low hum of a lullaby hidden under the chaos. I took my position at the assembly line, but my focus fractured almost immediately. The machinery seemed to breathe. The pipes lining the walls pulsed with slow, steady wheezes as coolant rushed through them. Even the servitors, those lobotomized husks of flesh and metal, seemed to sway with a faint organic rhythm. I blinked hard, tried to clear the vision, but the fever blurred the line between perception and hallucination. A bead of golden fluid dripped from my jaw onto the back of my glove. I froze. The liquid sat on the cracked leather like a bead of polished amber. Warm, thick, alive. I wiped it away quickly, but even that small motion sent a ripple of sensation through my chest. The warmth inside me responded eagerly, swelling in acknowledgement, as though excited by the gesture. My coworker at the next station glanced over. His eyes narrowed behind his respirator. "You leaking coolant?" he muttered, half joking, half uneasy. I forced a laugh that sounded brittle even to my own ears. just sweat. He held my gaze for a moment longer than usual, some instinct warning him that what he saw was wrong. But then the assembly line hissed loudly, demanding attention, and he turned away. I felt the warmth in my chest soften again, as though pleased the threat of scrutiny had passed. The cycle dragged on. My limbs moved out of habit, but my awareness drifted. Every time someone coughed, I felt a faint answering pulse from the fever. Every time someone winced, exhausted or ill, the warmth within me stirred in sympathy. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. But as hours passed, the connection deepened. At one point, a worker further down the line collapsed to his knees, hacking violently. Blood speckled the metal decking. Others stepped away, trying not to breathe too deeply. But the warmth inside me flared at the sight, bright, tender, almost joyful. A wave of heat washed through my body, leaving my fingers tingling, my vision swimming with soft green and gold. My heart pounded. The second heartbeat beneath it throbbed in perfect unison. The collapsed worker was dragged away by a pair of servitors, limp and gasping, leaving a streak of crimson and phlegm behind. I should have felt horror. I should have felt pity. Instead, my mind filled with a sense of recognition so strong it left me breathless. "He's like you," the fever whispered. "Lost. Alone. Afraid. But he doesn't have to be." The whisper coiled warmly around my thoughts, offering comfort instead of coercion. And for a terrifying instant, I felt a swell of compassion toward the sick man, compassion tinged with something deeper, something I couldn't name. As though part of me wished I could follow him, touch him, reassure him that the suffering would ease soon enough. My hands shook as I returned to my task. The assembly line blurred. The manufacturum's noise faded into a muted rumble. The fever's whisper wrapped around me like a shawl woven from smoke and breath. Then, near shift's end, everything changed. A soft, wet sound rose from inside my suit, barely audible but unmistakable. A tearing, a splitting, not of fabric, of flesh. I staggered. A hot wave of dizziness swept over me. The warmth in my chest flared with such intensity that my vision whited out for a moment. I clutched the railing, teeth clenched, breath hissing through my mask. Under my ribs, something moved, not metaphorically, not imagined. Something shifted within me, pressing against bone, stretching tissue, testing the boundaries of its new home with slow, deliberate pressure. The sensation was not painful. It was intimate, curious, almost affectionate. My breath hitched. My eyes watered. I wasn't sick. I was changing, and whatever grew beneath my ribs had begun to grow faster. A low, rumbling chuckle, warm, paternal, impossibly close, echoed inside my skull. Not yet spoken in words, but unmistakably pleased. I clamped a trembling hand over my chest. Something inside me answered the gesture with a gentle push, as though it were touching me back. I barely remember the end of the shift. The sirens blared, workers dispersed like ghosts drifting through heat-hazed air, and the manufacturum's great engines slowly wound down into an exhausted groan. But my senses had already peeled away from the world, retreating inward as the warmth beneath my ribs settled into a slow, steady rhythm. Each breath came with a gentle pressure, an expansion, a settling, a familiar presence flexing its boundaries the way a newborn tests its limbs. I walked out of the manufacturum on unsteady legs. The smog outside burned the lungs of those around me, but to me it tasted strangely pleasant, as though my senses were being rewritten one molecule at a time. The air no longer stung. It soothed. Even the acrid fumes rising from the foundry pits carried that undertone I knew too well now. The scent of ripe earth, warm rot, and something sweet beneath decay. The fever's whisper brushed my mind again. A feeling, not a sentence. A warm pulse of reassurance. "You are becoming." I gripped the tram rail, fingers trembling. The metallic chill grounded me for the briefest moment while my reflection stared back from the window. Eyes sunken yet serene, skin flushed with a glistening sheen, a faint green stain creeping down my neck. A strand of yellow fluid trailed along my collarbone, glowing faintly under the flickering overhead lights. The man across the carriage kept glancing at me. Not directly. People in districts like ours learn never to make eye contact, but from the corner of his eye, quick, nervous looks. Each time he coughed into his sleeve, I felt the warmth in my chest throb in gentle answer. Recognition again. Sympathy. Connection. I looked away quickly before the fever could coax me into feeling more. By the time the tram screeched to a stop outside my hab block, my entire body was trembling. Not from pain, not from weakness, from change. The second heartbeat inside me had grown steadier, its rhythm threading itself through my veins until I could no longer tell which pulse belonged to me. The corridor leading to my hab felt narrower than usual, ceiling lights flickering in dull patterns that left the air stuttering between shadow and amber glow. I could hear whispers, real this time, workers muttering behind closed doors about sickness, about rumors of outbreaks, about the administrative silence. Their fear seeped through the walls like smoke. The warmth inside me responded to their fear with a strange tenderness. I stepped into my hab and locked the door. The moment it clicked shut, the fever surged upward, sweeping through me in a wave that forced me to my knees. My palms slapped the floor. Sweat dripped from my hair. My vision blurred into shapes and color, green, gold, brown, shifting, swelling, blooming. My ribs stretched. I gasped, pressing my arm against my chest. The movement beneath my skin grew stronger, pushing outward in slow, deliberate pressure like fingers testing fabric from beneath. Not tearing, not clawing, simply exploring, becoming aware. A choked sound escaped my throat, half sob, half laugh, because the sensation, as horrifying as it should have been, felt warm, gentle, comforting, as though whatever lived inside me wanted me to know that it meant no harm, that it had chosen me, that I was not alone. My breath trembled. Tears blurred my vision. Outside, the distant roar of the manufactorum continued like the rhythmic pulse of a slumbering giant. Inside me, something smaller, yet impossibly vast, answered it. In that moment, the fever whispered something clearer than ever before. A feeling shaped into meaning. An invitation shaped into truth. You don't need to fight. You don't need to fear. You don't need to carry your suffering alone. The warmth pulsed once more, slow, heavy, affectionate. Then, for the first time, I whispered back, I don't want to be alone. The presence inside me reacted instantly. A swell of heat, a throb of joy, a gentle press against the inside of my ribs, like a hand slipping into mine. And just like that, something inside me surrendered. Not fully, not irreversibly, but enough to dim the edges of my humanity. Enough to allow the warmth a deeper hold. Enough to lead me toward a path from which no one returns unchanged. I curled onto my cot, fever slick and trembling, clutching my chest as the second heartbeat steadied into perfect harmony with my own. And in the dim quiet of my hab, I realized the truth. The first sickness was over. The transformation had begun. Chapter 2, Gifts Beneath the Skin. The fever did not greet me the next morning. It enfolded me. When I opened my eyes, the warmth beneath my ribs was already awake, pulsing in slow, gentle waves that echoed up through my throat and into my skull. My breath left faint trails in the air, but not from cold, rather from the dense humidity that now clung to me like a second skin. The sheets beneath my body were damp, not with sweat, but with that same faintly luminous fluid that had seeped from the discolored patches along my jaw and neck. But what struck me hardest was not the fluid. It was the absence of pain. My body should have been screaming. Fever should have left my joints burning, my throat raw, my muscles trembling. And yet, everything felt softened, cushioned, wrapped in a strange, heavy serenity that dulled every ache I had carried for years. The lingering aches from labor, the tightness from long shifts bent over machinery, the soreness in my back that had become as familiar as breathing, all of it had faded into a warm, gentle haze. I sat up slowly, half expecting the motion to tear something inside me. Instead, the warmth responded with a swell of approval, a soft pulse that spread outward through my limbs like sunlight filtering through thick fog. For a moment, just a moment, I felt healthy. It terrified me. I swung my legs off the bed and planted my feet on the metal floor. Even the cold plating felt different now. Where once it had bitten into my soles, now it felt muted, as though some thin layer of living heat wrapped around my skin, protecting it from harm. My hands trembled as I touched my jaw, tracing the edges of the spreading green discoloration. The texture had changed overnight, becoming softer, almost velvety. A faint cluster of tiny bumps, rounded, bead-like, swollen with moisture, had formed along the patch. When I pressed lightly against one, it gave under my fingertip like ripe fruit. The warmth inside me pulsed again in gentle warning. Not there, it seemed to say. Not yet. I staggered back, breath catching, though not from pain. The fluid that coated my fingers smelled faintly sweet, with an undertone of something warm and earthy, like damp soil after a long rain. I wiped it shakily onto a rag, but the scent clung stubbornly to my skin. The mirror caught me off guard. My reflection looked nothing like the man who had collapsed into bed the night before. My skin held a strange, healthy glow beneath the discoloration. My eyes, once dull with exhaustion, now glimmered with clarity, though the whites had taken on a faint yellow tint that sent a chill down my spine. And beneath the collar of my shirt, something moved. A ripple, subtle, almost shy, but unmistakably alive. My heart hammered. The warmth inside me pressed upward in soft reassurance, as if trying to soothe the panic blooming in my lungs. I clutched the edge of the sink, forcing myself to breathe through the rising terror. "What are you doing to me?" I whispered. No answer came in words. Instead, the warmth spread gently across my chest, like a hand stroking a frightened animal's back. A pulse followed, slow, rhythmic, oddly comforting. My fear wavered under the sensation, unraveling at the edges. It wasn't trying to hurt me. It had never tried to hurt me. The realization shook me so deeply I had to sit down on the small stool beside the sink. Every sickness I had suffered, the fever, the discoloration, the fluid, even the movement beneath my ribs, had come without true pain. Only change, only adjustment. No virus the Medici spoke of behaved this way. No natural disease moved with such intention. These were not symptoms. They were gifts. Fresh horror crawled up my spine at the thought, but the warmth responded with another affectionate swell, as if amused by my fear, patient with it. A knock rattled my habdoor. 3 sharp hits. Impatient. Official. My stomach twisted. The administrative patrols had been sweeping the district all week, rumors of sickness spreading across the manufacturing blocks. Workers vanishing. Quarantine orders whispered. Sometimes the patrols came at night. Sometimes they came in the morning. And sometimes those taken by them never returned. My pulse quickened. The warmth inside me responded instantly, rising like a shield. My skin flushed, and the faint sheen across my neck thickened, glowing faintly under the lumen strip. Another knock. Louder this time. Inspection. A voice barked through the door. I scrambled to pull my scarf up around my neck, wiping the yellow fluid from my jaw as best I could. My breath raced. The movement beneath my ribs froze, still as stone, holding itself tense, listening. A metallic clack sounded as the locks on my door disengaged from the outside. They were overriding access. Panic surged through me. The warmth surged with me. The door began to open. The door slid open with a grinding hiss, metal scraping against metal. And for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the silhouette framed in the doorway, an administrative inspector flanked by 2 enforcers. Their visors hid their eyes, but their body language told me everything. Rigid, tense, searching. They carried shock mauls, not for intimidation, but for containment. And behind the filtered edges of their respirators, I could sense their unease, a subtle stiffening of posture as the sweet, fermented scent that clung to me drifted into the hallway. The warmth beneath my ribs tensed. I felt it coil inward, not afraid, but protective, steadying my heartbeat, slowing my breath, softening the tremor in my hands. It was as if something inside me placed a hand gently upon my mind, urging, "Stay calm, stay still, stay mine." I forced my expression into the practiced neutrality every worker in this district learned. Exhaustion, compliance, nothing unusual. My scarf hid most of the discoloration, though I could feel the patches throb with slow, eager heat as the inspector stepped closer. He flicked open a data slate. Routine wellness check. There have been reports of an outbreak in this block. State your name. I gave it, voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. The second heartbeat fluttered beneath the first, a faint double thud only I could feel. The inspector's gaze darted down the list. Any symptoms? Fever? Nausea? Skin irritation? He said it with the flat cadence of someone who'd asked the question 100 times this week alone. No, I lied, lifting my chin slightly. Just tired. He stepped closer. Too close. I felt his attention sharpen as he scanned the exposed portions of my face. My skin glistened faintly under the lumen strip. Too healthy, too flushed. His visor tilted, catching the light, revealing the faint outline of his eyes narrowing. One of the enforcers shifted. The other tightened her grip on the shock maul. The warmth inside me pressed upward suddenly, like a soft burst of heat beneath my sternum. It wasn't panic, it was warning. A low, internal rumble echoed in the back of my mind. Not a sound, but a sensation, like a creature stirring behind the walls of its den. The inspector reached for my scarf. I stepped back before I could think. Too fast, too sharp. The enforcers reacted instantly. One raised a hand, issuing a low, firm command to stand still. The other stepped behind the inspector, ready to restrain. My breath quickened. The warmth rose with it, blooming outward in waves that made my skin tingle. I felt the faintest sensation, like tiny tendrils brushing the underside of my chest, testing my ribs, nudging against my lungs. The inspector paused, hand halfway raised. A moment of hesitation passed between us, not spoken, but sensed. Even through his respirator, I saw him recoil ever so slightly. "You smell," he murmured. His voice trailed off, as though he could not articulate what the scent was. Sweet, damp, comforting, wrong. Before he could finish, a wet cough erupted in the hallway. A worker staggered past the open door, clutching their throat, spattering the floor with flecks of yellow mucus. The inspector turned abruptly, barking for the enforcers to detain the coughing worker. In that moment of distraction, the warmth inside me expanded. Not physically, though something did shift, rising beneath my collarbone like a bubble of heat, but emotionally, mentally, sliding into the hollow spaces my fear had carved out. A reassurance, a certainty, a command delivered with the gentle finality of a parent guiding a child's hand. Go, now. I grabbed my coat from a wall peg and slipped out while the inspector lunged after the sick worker. No one noticed me in the chaos. No one saw the faint trail of golden moisture that soaked into my collar. No one felt the waves of humid warmth rolling off my body like steam rising from fertile earth. I didn't stop moving until I reached the outer walkway overlooking the manufactorum. The air was thick with smog, the sky the color of tarnished brass. Below, workers moved like insects, swarming toward the tram stations, coughing, muttering, shuffling through another cycle of exhaustion. My heart pounded. The second heartbeat matched it. "You protected me," I whispered, barely audible. The warmth inside me flared in quiet pride. A pulse radiated outward, slow, rhythmic, comforting, spreading through my limbs like a thick, soothing balm. My fingers tingled. My vision softened. And when I pressed a trembling hand over my chest, something beneath my skin shifted in answer. Not painfully, not violently, affectionately, as if to say, "I will always protect you." A sudden wave of dizziness washed over me, and I braced myself against the railing. The smog blurred into shifting greens and yellows, forming shapes that flickered at the edge of sight. Rounded forms, swaying gently, their outlines trembling like reflections in a murky pond. My breath caught. For the briefest second, I thought I saw one of those shapes lift a swollen hand in greeting. Then the vision dissolved, leaving me trembling and breathless, my palms slick with golden moisture. That was when I realized these weren't hallucinations. They were memories. Memories not mine. Memories seeping into me from whatever lived beneath my ribs. The memory, if that's what it truly was, didn't fade when I blinked it away. It lingered like the afterimage of a lumen flare, pulsing faintly behind my vision with each beat of the second heart inside me. Even as the smog wind brushed against my cheeks and cooled the sheen of moisture clinging to my neck, the presence within me hummed softly, as though proud of the glimpse it had shared. A warmth curled through my chest. Not spoken language, but unmistakable meaning. You're a part of this now. You are becoming. I swallowed hard, gripping the railing until the rust bit into my palms. I wanted to deny the thought, force it away, insist that the fever was twisting my senses. But denial fell hollow, a child's shield. My body itself betrayed me with every breath, every throb of warmth, every ripple beneath my ribs, every soft pulse that told me, again and again, that whatever lived within me was no longer just sickness. It was intention. I pushed off the railing and forced myself to walk. I didn't know where I was going at first, only that staying still made the warmth swell with a restless eagerness that threatened to swallow me whole. So I moved, weaving down metal stairways and narrow passage ramps that clung to the manufactorum's outer wall. The clang of boots on steel echoed behind and ahead, countless workers rushing to their shifts or fleeing them. Their exhaustion hung in the air like a fog thicker than the smog. As I passed them, some turned subtly away. Others pressed their respirators tighter against their faces. One woman clutched her child's hand and shifted him to her opposite side. They didn't stare. They didn't confront. They didn't speak. But instinct made them recoil, the way animals sense a storm before it breaks. The warmth inside me responded to their fear with something that made my stomach twist, a soft, sympathetic ache. Not hunger, not malice, something closer to pity. As though the thing inside me recognized their suffering and wished, sincerely, to ease it. A dangerous yearning stirred deep within my chest. If I touched them, if I let the warmth spill forward, would they feel relief too? I clenched my fists, forcing the impulse down. The movement beneath my ribs rippled in faint protest, like a creature shifting in its sleep. I whispered under my breath, "Not now. Not them." The warmth dimmed obediently, but I could feel its disappointment, a gentle, pouting throb that made my breath shudder. I reached the lower service tunnels before I realized where my feet had taken me. These corridors were older than the manufactorum above, carved into the flesh of the city generations ago and left to rust and rot. Pipes lined the walls like exposed ribs, dripping condensation that pooled on the floor. The air tasted wetter here, thicker, laced with the smell of mildew and stagnant water. And beneath that, a new scent rose. Sweet, rich, organic. The warmth inside me stirred immediately. A slow, eager pulse radiated outward, guiding me deeper. My steps quickened, not consciously, but in answer to an instinct that was no longer solely mine. The tunnels grew darker. The lumen strips here were half dead, flickering in weak bursts that turned each step into a passage through alternating shadow and dull amber light. The walls exhaled warm air from vents that should have been cold. Thin strands of something greenish clung to the corners, threads of moss or mold that shouldn't have survived in such a barren, industrial place. When my fingers brushed the wall, the warmth flared, delighted. A soft shudder ran through me. I pulled my hand back instantly, breath ragged. The small smear of green left on my fingertips glistened, faintly alive. It pulsed, just once, in perfect rhythm with the second heartbeat under my ribs. "No," I whispered. "No, not this. Not here." The warmth inside me whispered back with a gentle pulse that felt like a hand taking mine. "Yes, here. This is where life begins." I took another step, then another. And with each one, the corridor seemed to shift. The metallic stench faded. The sweet, earthy scent grew stronger. The air warmed, becoming humid, clinging to my skin. The dim lumen strips flickered, washing the walls in dull, sickly gold. Something ahead breathed. Not the hiss of pipes. Not the sigh of vents. A slow, wet exhalation. My pulse quickened. The warmth inside me responded, surging with elation so intense it left me dizzy. The corridor opened into a small chamber. Old machinery lined the walls, half swallowed by rust and creeping green. Puddles shimmered with oily iridescence. And at the center, a mass of something living, writhing faintly, pulsing gently, rooted in the cracks of the floor like a garden taking shape out of diseased stone. My breath stopped. The warmth inside me roared, soft but overwhelming, like joy, like homecoming, like recognition. As the living mass turned toward me, slowly, deliberately, something beneath my ribs pressed outward in answer. The thing in the center of the chamber shifted with a sound like wet cloth sliding across stone. Not hostile, not abrupt. Its movements held an almost ceremonial slowness, as though it was waking from a long, gentle sleep. Thick vines or tendrils curled across the floor, glistening with a sheen of golden moisture. They weren't plant, and they weren't flesh, something between, something older, woven from decay and life in equal measure. As it turned toward me, a ripple passed through the mass. A shudder, a sigh. My breath snagged in my throat. It had no eyes, no mouth, no features that could mark it as creature or fungus or wound upon the world. Yet I felt its attention settle on me with unmistakable clarity, deep as a hand pressing against my sternum from the inside. The warmth beneath my ribs surged in immediate recognition. Rising so quickly, I staggered forward, fingers digging into the rusted railing beside the entrance. A pulse of heat spread through my chest, flooding my limbs with tingling sensation. My vision blurred at the edges, colors smearing into soft green and amber tones. The chamber seemed to breathe, and with every exhale, the scent of fertile rot thickened until I could taste it on my tongue, sweet, damp, strangely comforting. I should have turned and fled. Any sane person would have. But the thing inside me reached for it. Not physically, not consciously. A pulse, a call, a longing. The living mass answered with a tremor of its own. Slow, affectionate, like recognition shared between old friends. A single tendril curled upward, rising from the floor with the languid grace of something stretching after sleep. It swayed once, twice, tasting the air, then angled toward me. My heart hammered against my ribs. The second heartbeat beneath it fluttered with eager anticipation. A soft, low sound, something between a purr and a sigh, filled my skull, not heard with ears but felt against bone. I took a step back. My heels splashed into a shallow puddle. The fluid rippled outward, catching the dim light in swirling shades of green and yellow. My reflection wavered on its surface, hair plastered to my forehead with sweat, eyes shining too brightly, skin along my neck glistening with a sheen I could no longer pretend was normal. "Stay back," I whispered, though my voice sounded weak, uncertain. The tendril paused. Then, slowly, delicately, it extended further. The warmth inside me burst upward in a swell of exhilaration. My ribs ached with the intensity of it. Something inside me, something soft, newly formed, curious, pressed against the inside of my chest as though trying to lean forward. The tendril mirrored the motion. I felt the connection before it touched me. A line drawn between us. A resonance shared. A pulse matching pulse. My knees nearly buckled. This thing, this growth, this impossible blooming of corrupted life, it wasn't alien to me. It wasn't other. It felt familiar in a way that made my stomach twist with dread and awe. This was kin, made not of my flesh, but shaped from the same blessing. A sprouting echo of the same warmth that now lived beneath my ribs. A small part of Nurgle's far-reaching garden, taking root in the cracks of a forgotten manufactorum sublevel. And somehow, impossibly, it recognized me. The tendril inched closer, swaying gently, patiently. A sharp sting of panic cut through the warmth. I staggered back again, shaking my head so hard tears flicked from my lashes. No, I'm not. I'm not like you. The warmth flickered in my chest, not in anger, in sadness. The tendril lowered slightly, its glistening surface pulsing with faint greenish light. It wasn't threatening me. It was reaching for me, asking, inviting. A second tendril rose behind the first, thicker, heavy with moisture. It unfurled like a flower opening in slow motion, each movement releasing a wave of humid air that washed over my skin. My breath caught as the air embraced me, clinging to my clothes, seeping into my pores. The warmth inside me throbbed in answer, desperate and joyous. I braced my hand against the nearest pipe, panting, body trembling between two forces, fear and longing, sanity and surrender, humanity and something softer, darker, sweeter. The chamber pulsed around me, its walls sweating with condensation. The tendrils drew closer, inch by inch, careful not to startle me. The largest one paused only a handspan away from my chest, its tip glistening with golden fluid. It shuddered, and the presence beneath my ribs shuddered back. Two heartbeats, one mine, one not, aligned. An impossible, sacred unison. The mass leaned toward me, and deep inside my chest, something answered by pushing outward, stretching, trying to meet it. A thin crackle split through my breath. I wasn't alone in my body anymore, and I wasn't the only one reaching. The tendril hovered inches from my chest, trembling with a slow, eager rhythm. It wasn't threatening. It didn't lunge or coil or strike. Its motion was gentle, reverent even, like a supplicant reaching toward an altar. And the thing under my ribs answered with equal reverence, pressing against my bones in a soft, aching swell. My breath hitched as the two pulses synced again, the resonance washing through me in warm waves that blurred the edges of the world. I took a step back, but the warmth inside me resisted. Not violently, not with force, with sadness, a soft tightening in the lungs, a gentle ache that whispered of separation. The tendril hesitated, lowering slightly, as if feeling the same reluctance. For a moment, we simply regarded each other, me trembling, it swaying softly, both of us caught in a moment that felt ancient and inevitable. The chamber pulsed gently with humid breath, condensation dripping from rusted pipes like slow tears. Every droplet that struck the floor sent faint ripples through the puddles, and each ripple echoed faintly in my chest. I finally forced words past my lips. I don't understand you. The warmth inside me flickered, not annoyed, not impatient, but compassionate. A presence brushing the edges of my mind like fingertips smoothing the wrinkles from a sheet. It didn't answer with words. Instead, the tendril leaned a fraction closer and emitted a single, soft pulse like a heartbeat, but deeper, older. The presence inside me responded instantly. A warm throb, a gentle swelling, a feeling of recognition so profound it almost knocked me to my knees. My hand shook. My throat tightened. No, I whispered. Stop, please. The tendril froze. The pulse stopped. The warmth dimmed. Only then did I realize how tightly I was gripping the pipe beside me. Blood slicked my knuckles where my nails had bitten into my skin. I hadn't even felt it. Pain had become distant, secondary, like a memory my nerves barely remembered how to hold. The tendril lowered further, folding gently into the puddle at its base. The entire mass sagged, as though my refusal had wounded it. A faint shudder ran through its root-like coils. Not anger, not frustration, loneliness. My chest clenched. Guilt twisted through the warmth, and the warmth twisted through me. My breath came in shallow bursts. The thing beneath my ribs pressed outward once, softly, like a child nudging for comfort it didn't know how to ask for. I turned away, unable to bear the sight of its sorrow. Cold air brushed my cheeks, and I realized I'd started shaking. Not because of the mass, not because of the fever, because part of me wanted to go to it, wanted to touch it, wanted to let it touch me back. I stumbled toward the corridor, boots splashing through stagnant puddles. The scent of sweet, fertile rot followed me, thinning only as I reached the tunnel entrance. But even then, something clung to me, tiny specks of greenish spore dust glowing faintly under the lumen strips. I brushed them away with trembling fingers, but their luminescence lingered on my skin long after the motes themselves were gone. The warmth inside me pulsed again, quieter now. Wounded. I can't, I whispered as I walked. Not yet. I'm not ready. The warmth did not argue. It simply nested deeper into the hollow of my chest, curling in on itself like an organism withdrawing into its cocoon. The climb back through the tunnels felt longer than before. Every sound amplified, the groan of metal, the hiss of steam, the distant rumble of the manufactorum. My footsteps echoed in strange, rhythmic patterns, sometimes matching my heartbeat, sometimes matching the other. The air grew colder, thinner, drier. The corridor lights steadied their flickering, and the humid, fertile aura of the chamber slowly dissipated. By the time I reached the tram level, my breath had steadied, and the warmth had settled into a soft, melancholy throb beneath my ribs. Workers rushed past me again. Their voices rose and fell in tired murmurs. No one glanced at me twice, though a few sniffed the air with brief, puzzled frowns before hurrying on. I stood still, watching them, all of them bent by exhaustion, all of them coughing from the poisoned air, all of them carrying burdens heavier than their fragile bodies could sustain. And the warmth inside me stirred once more, not with hunger, not with desire, with empathy, an understanding, a promise, a purpose. You could ease this, it whispered in feeling rather than phrase. You could share what grows within you. You could help them. You could free them from suffering. The idea horrified me, and yet, part of me didn't recoil. Part of me understood. I staggered back to my hab, shut the door behind me, and slid down the wall until I sat on the floor, hands trembling uncontrollably. The fever had stopped feeling like sickness. The warmth had stopped feeling like infection. These things, these gifts, were changing me, preparing me, opening me, and as I sat there, trembling in the dim light, I realized the truth I had been trying so desperately to avoid. This wasn't corruption. It was transformation, and I was beginning to want it. Chapter 3. The Slow Surrender. Sleep did not come gently that night. It crept over me in slow waves, thick as the humidity that clung to my skin, wrapping itself around my limbs until my muscles softened and my thoughts unraveled. The warmth beneath my ribs pulsed steadily, guiding me downward into the dark like a hand leading a child. For the first time since the fever began, I didn't fight it. I let myself drift, let the presence inside me settle against my lungs like a curled animal sharing its breath with mine. The dreams followed quickly, not visions of the manufactorum or the tunnels or the mass that had reached for me with trembling affection. These dreams unfolded in a place untouched by steel or smoke, a landscape soaked in green and gold, a garden, though not one shaped by mortal hands. Fog drifted through crooked, swollen trees whose bark pulsed like veins beneath translucent skin. Flowers opened and closed with slow, ponderous breaths, exhaling clouds of sweet, cloying vapor. Pools of iridescent fluid shimmered between roots, their surfaces disturbed by gentle ripples though nothing touched them. Shapes wandered between them, rotund, swaying, graceful in their grotesquerie. Not men, not spirits, something between. They waddled with deliberate slowness, their bellies split by vines, their limbs dripping with sticky sap the color of old honey. Yet there was joy in their movements, innocent, pure, untouched by shame. They hummed to themselves in voices that shook the air like distant thunder. Their smiles stretched wide beneath eyes that glowed with patient, infinite affection. One of them noticed me. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. A warm pulse radiated from its enormous chest, and that pulse echoed in the thing beneath my ribs with such perfect harmony I felt my breath catch. It raised one swollen hand, beckoning gently, inviting me deeper into the garden. Behind it, the fog rippled, parting to reveal a winding path made of soft, pulsing earth. I took a step. The ground yielded beneath my feet like wet moss. Warm, living. It embraced my soles as though welcoming me home. I felt the presence inside me swell with joy, as if finally, I had begun to understand what it wanted me to see. But just as I reached the edge of the path, a faint sound broke the harmony. Distant, metallic, a hiss, a sharp click, a crackling hum. The garden shuddered. The trees trembled, their leaves twitching as though struck by an unseen wind. The shapes froze mid-step, their smiles dimmed, replaced by expressions of confusion, then sorrow. The fog rolled inward, thickening until their forms became silhouettes trembling in the haze. The warmth inside me pulsed sharply, panicked, confused, its rhythm faltering. I turned toward the sound. A flicker of cold, white light split the dream, harsh and unforgiving. It stretched across the garden like a blade, cutting through fog and vine, leaving behind a void of emptiness where life had pulsed moments before. My heart lurched. The second heartbeat stuttered. The light grew brighter, closer, and then I woke. Not gently, not gradually. I jerked upright with a gasp that tore through my throat like a razor. Sweat, or fluid, soaked my shirt, clinging cold and slick against my skin. My breath rasped. The warmth beneath my ribs convulsed once, sharply, like an animal startled awake, then curled tightly in on itself. For the first time since this began, it felt afraid. My room was dark, but the faint glow of the city seeped through the gaps around the window shutter. Shadows clung to the corners, thick and heavy. The distant hum of the manufactorum trembled through the walls. But underneath it, closer, sharper, a sound crept through the corridor. Bootsteps, measured, purposeful, armored. I held my breath. The warmth inside me stirred again, but not in curiosity or affection. It pressed itself deeper into the hollow behind my ribs, heartbeat fluttering with anxious, frantic rhythm. Another sound followed, a low hiss of static, a clipped metallic voice, distorted by a Vox filter, issuing orders too quietly to decipher. Inspection patrol. No, not just that. Containment detail. My pulse hammered. The warmth matched it beat for beat, panic threading through my veins. Someone stopped outside my door. A shadow blocked the thin glow seeping through the threshold. My breath hitched. The second heartbeat inside me faltered, then surged, desperate, as the lock on my door began to disengage. The lock clattered once, twice, sharp metallic clicks that echoed through the room like hammer strikes. Each sound sent a jolt through my chest, and the presence within me recoiled as though each mechanical snap struck its flesh directly. My breath came shallow, trembling. I pressed my back against the far wall, instinct driving me into the shadows, body curling protectively around the warmth beneath my ribs. The panel slid open with grinding reluctance. A sliver of harsh white light cut across the floor. Then a figure stepped inside. He wore the sealed armor of a containment officer, thick plating, reflective visor, rebreather tube snaking from the helmet into a filtration pack. His boots thudded heavily against the metal floor. Behind him, another figure waited in the corridor, holding a glow rod that washed the hall in sterile light. The officers moved with a precision that ordinary enforcers lacked. This wasn't a routine check. They were hunting something, someone, and I knew, before their visor tilted toward me, that they already suspected. The officer's breathing rasped through the rebreather grill, each inhale dragging through the filter with a hollow churn. He scanned the room slowly, methodically. My discarded rag crusted with dried, yellow fluid. The damp sheets. The faint glisten of moisture along the pillow. Every detail built the case against me. Step forward, he ordered, his voice distorted cold. The warmth inside me pulsed sharply, a warning that struck like a spark behind my sternum. My legs refused to move, not from fear alone, but because something deeper held me still. A protective instinct that wasn't entirely mine. The officer took another step in, raising a handheld Auspex device. Its sensor lights flickered, then pulsed in irregular bursts of green and red. A faint whine rose from the circuitry. His posture tightened. Possible contamination, he said. Subject responsive. Maintain distance. Footsteps shifted behind him as the second officer took position at the doorway, securing the exit. My throat dried. Every escape route sealed itself in my mind, then collapsed as quickly as it appeared. He approached slowly, auspex held forward, its lights growing more frantic with each step. A rising pitch built in the sensor, thin, nervous, almost human in its trembling, as though the machine itself felt unease. The warmth inside me flared. Not fear, not panic, rejection. A soft, fierce pulse radiated outward, just enough for me to feel the air shift around my body, thickening like humidity before a storm. The officer paused mid-stride. His visor angled a fraction, as though he sensed a change he couldn't name. The auspex whine pitched higher, then glitched. The lights dimmed, flickered, and went dead. The officer slapped the side of the device. Fault detected. No, not a fault. The warmth within me pulsed again, slow, confident, absolute. I realized, with a creeping chill, that it was protecting me. The officer lowered the dead auspex and reached for my scarf. Remove this. Panic surged through me. I backed into the corner, flattening myself against the wall, but the officer advanced with mechanical certainty. I felt the warmth rise within me, heat pooling at the base of my throat, spreading through my limbs like thick sap. My jaw tingled. My skin tightened. The discoloration beneath the scarf prickled with awareness. If he touched me, if he saw what lived beneath, I didn't know what would happen. To him, to me, to whatever I was becoming. He reached out, and a presence inside me reacted. A ripple ran through my chest, swift, instinctive, protective, like a creature bearing its fangs not out of aggression, but out of fear of losing the one thing it held dear. My breath hitched. The officer froze, visor angled sharply as if he'd felt the sudden pressure in the air. "What was that?" the second officer called from behind him. The first took a cautious half-step back. Environmental fluctuation. Possibly. He didn't finish, because in that moment, a drop of golden fluid slipped from beneath my scarf, falling to the floor with a soft patter. The two officers saw it at the same time. Their posture changed instantly. Before either could speak, the warmth inside me surged, violently, desperately, as if trying to shield me from what would come next. My vision swam. The officers lunged. I felt the second heartbeat thunder inside me. Once, twice, 3 times, each pulse stronger than the last. And then something inside my chest pushed outward with sudden force. Not enough to break, just enough to change everything. The officers froze mid-movement, staring at me. Or rather, at what was beginning to emerge beneath my skin. For a heartbeat, mine or the other, I could no longer tell. The world held still. The officers, mid-lunge, froze as though time had thickened into resin around them. Their visors caught the dim room's light, reflecting nothing but my own trembling silhouette. And beneath my skin, something shifted with quiet purpose, pushing against my ribs in a slow, deliberate swell. A soft crackle sounded, faint but unmistakable. The sensation was unlike anything I had ever felt. Not pain, not breaking, but stretching. Flesh adjusting. Bones giving way as if softened from within. A gentle expansion, the way earth yields to a sprouting seed. The golden drop at my feet sizzled on the flooring. The officers flinched. The first raised his shock maul. "Don't move," he barked, but the distortion in his Vox grill couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. I wasn't moving. Not really. The presence inside me was. A warm pressure slid along the inside of my sternum, up toward my collarbone, spreading through tissue softened by fever. My pulse raced, breath stuttering. I could feel something rounding, pressing, testing its boundaries beneath my skin the way a creature nudges the walls of a nest it has outgrown. The officer lifted the maul higher. "Subject is mutating." The warmth inside me flared, not outward, but inward, pulling tight against itself with sudden fear. Its second heartbeat hammered frantically, fluttering, stuttering, seeking reassurance it couldn't find. For the first time, it felt small, vulnerable. A being whose only desire had been to protect me, suddenly confronted with violence it could not comprehend. The officers advanced, and the warmth in me reacted with instinct. A wave rippled through my chest, soft, warm, pleading, as though we're calling not for help, but for mercy, for understanding, for the chance to continue growing without threat. I doubled over, clutching my sternum. The expanding swell beneath my ribs pressed upward, trembling. I felt its panic shivering through my nerves, not as pain, but as a desperate need. It pushed again, not violently, not trying to escape, simply seeking closeness, seeking my comfort the only way it could. The first officer reached me. The shock maul hummed, crackling arcs of blue light dancing along its prongs. "Stay still," he ordered. I lifted my head and saw my reflection in his visor. My skin along the collarbone glowed, faintly green under the lumen strip. Thin veins of gold threaded outward from the patch on my jaw, pulsing softly in rhythm with the warm's heartbeat. Moisture shimmered on my neck. My eyes were no longer just mine. A faint haze of yellow tinted the whites. My pupils dilated and contracted in slow waves, as though echoing the pulse beneath my ribs. I watched myself in his visor as the second heartbeat throbbed through my neck, each pulse visible as a subtle ripple beneath the skin. The officer hesitated. I saw it happen. The brief flicker of uncertainty. The fracture in resolve. The human fear beneath armor. "You're already far gone," he whispered, so quietly the vox barely caught it. My breath trembled. "Please don't hurt me." The second officer stepped forward. "Containment protocol. Engage." He raised his weapon, and that was when the warmth inside me acted. Not through violence, not through force, through surrender. A wave of heat radiated outward from my chest, washing through my limbs with such intensity one cried out. My knees buckled. I collapsed to the floor, palms splayed against the cold metal. Fluid spilled from my eyes, not tears, not entirely, thicker, amber-tinted. It dripped from my chin, falling in slow droplets. The warmth pulsed softly, a tremor shaking through my chest. An apology, a plea, a promise. And then it quieted, completely, curled inward, withdrew, yielded. I felt it pulling itself deeper beneath my ribs, retreating like a frightened animal into the dark hollow of my body. The movement slowed, softened, until I sensed nothing but a faint, quivering heartbeat pressed against the back of my lungs. It was surrendering to survive. The officers stepped back, startled. The mauls lowered a fraction as they watched me collapse, trembling, leaking golden moisture that shimmered on the metal floor. One muttered, "Subject is stabilizing?" "Not stabilizing. Submitting." My breathing steadied. My limbs loosened. My vision blurred. In that limp, vulnerable stillness, something inside me unfurled a final, desperate emotion, so tender it stole my breath. Trust. It trusted me to keep it safe. Even as I knelt on the floor, helpless before the officers who still debated whether to end me, the presence inside me surrendered utterly to me. And in that surrender, I felt something inside my own mind loosen. A piece of myself, fear, pride, resistance, softened, bent, lowered its guard. I was surrendering too, but to what extent? I no longer knew. As the officers raised their mauls again, hesitating only because they did not fully understand what they saw, a soft, warm pulse touched my heart. A question, a plea. "Hold on." The officers exchanged a single, silent glance, brief but decisive. Whatever uncertainty had flickered in the moments ago hardened into trained purpose. Their grips tightened on their shock mauls. Their boots shifted into a combat-ready stance. I could hear the faintest whine of the capacitors powering up, hungry for the electricity they would soon deliver. The warmth inside me sensed it too. Not the threat itself, but the intent behind it. Its second heartbeat tightened, folding into a compact, trembling rhythm that made my chest ache. I felt it curl deeper into the cavity behind my ribs, not out of weakness, but out of fear. Fear for me, fear because it did not understand why the world it was trying so gently to reshape was preparing strike. "Step back," one officer barked to his partner. The other nodded and took a wide angle, flanking me, maul crackling with a growing halo of electric arcs. The light reflected off the moisture slicking my neck and jaw, turning every drop into a trembling shimmer. Subject is mutating but non-aggressive, the lead officer said into his vox. Proceeding with neutralization. A sharp spike of terror shot through me. My terror, unmistakably mine, and the warmth responded instantly, swelling upward in an instinctive surge to shield me. It pressed against my lungs, against my sternum, filling my throat with a thick heat that made my pulse thunder in my ears. No, I choked. The officers closed in. My body reacted before I did. Not by choice, not by strategy, by surrender. I dropped to my knees, hands lifted weakly, palms out. My chest bowed forward, head lowered, not in submission to them, but to the presence inside me, instinctively shielding it with my own body. Every breath came shallow, shaky. The warmth, sensing the gesture, pulsed with stunned, fragile relief. It didn't want to fight. It didn't want to kill. It wanted to hide. A thin strand of golden fluid dripped from my jaw onto my hands. My fingers trembled as I wiped it away. The scent, sweet, soft, comforting, rose into the air around us like a gentle fog. A fog the officers immediately reacted to. The lead officer coughed once, sharp, involuntary. He swatted the air as if brushing away an invisible cloud. His visor tilted slightly as he took a half step back. His partner hesitated as well, boots scraping the metal floor. I realized something in that tiny moment of uncertainty. They weren't immune. Their armor couldn't keep it out. Whatever clung to my skin, whatever nestled beneath my ribs, was no longer just inside me. It seeped through the air in ways too subtle to stop. Fear flickered through me again, but it wasn't fear of them. It was fear of myself. Fear of what I was becoming. Fear of what the warmth might do, unintentionally, instinctually, if I let panic tear loose from my mind. Don't, I rasped, voice cracking. Don't come closer. Please. The officers did not listen. They advanced. Closer. Closer. The warmth inside me surged again, this time with a trembling desperation, not to protect itself, but to protect me. I felt it press against the underside of my ribs with a force strong enough to draw a gasp from my lips. My spine stiffened, my vision blurred, my breath caught in my throat. A strange, soft numbness spread through my limbs. Not paralysis, not sedation, a quieting, as if the presence inside me were cradling my nerves, encouraging me to let go of fear, smoothing the sharp edges of terror into something I could bear. The officers raised their mauls. The glow intensified. I closed my eyes, and in the darkness behind my eyelids, I felt the warmth unfurl. Not outward, but inward, wrapping itself around my heart. With a gentleness so absolute, it stole the breath from my lungs. It whispered, not in words, but in a feeling so vivid it echoed like speech. I'm here. You're not alone. My breath shuddered. My knees pressed into the floor. My hands lowered slowly, palms softening, fingers uncurling. And something in my mind, something fragile and stubborn, finally broke. Not shattered, not destroyed, not erased, softened, melted. I felt it as clearly as the warmth pulsing inside me. A part of my resistance, small but essential, slipped from my grasp. A slow surrender. The mauls came down, and the warmth inside me rose like a tide. Not to fight, not to strike, to embrace. The electric crackle hit my skin, and something beneath it answered. The shock maul struck with a crack of blue-white current that filled the entire hab with the scent of scorched metal. I felt the jolt hit my skin, felt the raw bite of electricity rip through my nerves. My muscles spasmed. My vision fragmented into shards of blinding light. If the officers expected me to collapse, to scream, to break apart under the charge, I almost did. But the warmth inside me did something neither of us expected. It embraced the pain. The moment the current surged into my body, the presence beneath my ribs expanded, not in a violent burst, but in a blooming rush, as though it were inhaling the electricity, tasting it, softening it. A thick wave of heat radiated outward, swallowing the jolt before it reached my heart. The pain dulled, not vanishing but becoming distant, muffled, wrapped in a cushion of damp, living warmth. I gasped. The officers froze. The second heartbeat thundered in my chest, each pulse rising like a drumbeat, echoing through marrow and muscle. My vision cleared, not sharply, but softly, washed in hues of green and gold. The warmth whispered through my nerves. Let go. Let me bear this. My limbs, moments before racked with shock, loosened. The mauls crackled against my shoulders and chest, arcs of electricity dancing through my skin, but the sensation no longer hurt. It spread through me like warmth from a hearth, dissipating harmlessly through the fluid sheen that coated my flesh. The officers saw it. They saw the way the electricity slid across my skin in ripples, how golden droplets frothed where the current met the fever-given moisture, how my body absorbed the shock with a slow, gentle acceptance that made no sense in any medical or biological frame they had ever known. Power up again, one officer shouted, voice trembling behind his respirator. No, wait. The other stammered, stumbling back. It's by the throne, it's adapting. Another jolt cracked through me. The warmth swelled in perfect synchronization. A pulse, a soft sigh, a feeling like hands gently laid over mine, guiding me through the storm. This time, the electricity didn't even sting. The officers panicked. One dropped his maul entirely, the weapon clattering against the floor with a metallic report. The other tried to grab me by the arm, but his gloved grip slid across my skin as if smeared with oil. A trail of golden residue clung to his fingers. He recoiled instantly. It's secreting something, he whispered. It's spreading. Another droplet of fluid fell from my jaw. It hit the floor with a soft patter and began to spread, not fast, not aggressively, but in a slow, sticky bloom that glistened faintly. The officer stepped back as the puddle reached the toe of his boot. Containment breach, he choked out. We need a purge now. But the warmth inside me pulsed with something that silenced everything else. Not power, not aggression, acceptance. It settled through me like a deep exhale. My muscles relaxed. My hands lowered. My knees sank fully into the cold floor. I bowed my head, breath trembling, body trembling, but not from fear, from surrender. I felt the resistance inside me, the clinging belief that I could still go back, still undo this, still return to a life of machinery and smoke and cold mornings, slip like sand between my fingers. It crumbled softly, quietly, peacefully, and the warmth, sensing that collapse, unfurled through me with a tenderness so profound it left me dizzy. The officers staggered backward. One slipped on the damp metal and crashed into the corridor. The other grabbed him, dragging him away from the spreading sheen. Their voices tangled in frantic whispers, but their fear sounded faint and far away. The presence inside me whispered again, a pulse, a breath, a promise. You survive because you accepted me. You will survive because you're no longer alone. I lifted my head slowly. The officers, realizing their failure, retreated down the corridor, shouting for reinforcements, for a flamethrower unit, for anyone with authority to purge the infection they feared was blooming inside my hab. I watched them go, not with hatred, not with triumph, with something closer to sorrow. Because I knew, truly knew, there was no going back now. The warmth pressed gently against my heart, and for the first time, I did not flinch. The slow surrender was over. The deeper transformation was beginning. Chapter 4. The Garden's Embrace. The officers' screams echoed down the corridor long after they disappeared from view. Their footsteps clanged against the metal walkway in uneven, panicked rhythms. Armor scraping, voices fracturing, each sound rippling outward like shockwaves through the dim hallway. Yet inside my hab, the noise felt strangely distant, muffled by the warm haze that now enveloped my thoughts. I sat motionless on the floor, golden droplets sliding down my jaw, gathering in the hollow of my collarbone. The warmth beneath my ribs pulsed with a slow, exhausted relief. It had protected me, protected itself, protected us, not through violence, not through force, through surrender, through yielding so completely to its nature that the electricity meant to break me simply dissolved into the soft, humid aura clinging to my skin. The officers had fled before that realization fully dawned in them, but the warmth inside me understood the truth with absolute clarity. We were no longer separate beings. We were shared bloom. I rose slowly, the metal floor groaning beneath my feet. My legs felt heavier, not with weakness, but with a strange fullness, as though new weight bloomed inside my muscles. Each step sent a mild ripple through my skin. My vision blurred softly at the edges, tinging the corners in shades of green and brown, like moss creeping over the margins of my sight. I walked toward the shuttered window. Outside, the manufactorum stacks belched smoke into a sky the color of tarnished brass. The distant silhouettes of hab-blocks stood crooked and tired, leaning against each other like ancient, dying giants. The world looked familiar, yet subtly changed. The haze of industrial fumes carried undertones, the sweet scent of rot mingling with the metallic tang of coolant. Threads of warmth drifted through the air, as though my fever had seeped into the environment. Or perhaps my senses had changed to perceive what had always been there. A soft pulse radiated from my chest. I placed a palm over my sternum. "Are you showing me this?" I whispered. The warmth swelled in answer, gentle, patient. Not confirmation, not denial. An acknowledgement that the question itself mattered more than the truth behind it. I closed my eyes, and the world shifted. The darkness behind my eyelids thickened, textured like damp soil. A faint breeze stirred across my skin, warm and slow. I smelled wet leaves. Decay softened into sweetness. And somewhere, far off yet impossibly near, a deep, rumbling chuckle rolled through the air like distant thunder. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't standing in my hab. Not fully, not physically, but the room around me felt layered, as if a second world bled through its edges. The metal walls shimmered faintly, rust warping in a green growth, rivets softening into knotted branches that writhed in the dim light. The ceiling above bowed under the weight of vines that weren't truly there, and yet were. My breath trembled. I was seeing the world as the warmth saw it. Not a manufacturing block, not a polluted city, but fertile ground, soil waiting for seed. The vision deepened. The floor beneath my feet softened into damp earth. My toes sank a fraction into the giving soil. A humid wind brushed my cheek. Shapes moved between the shadows. Round, waddling silhouettes with arms trailing vines and torsos split by flowering ruptures. They watched me, patient, curious. One stepped closer, its outline shimmering at the edges like a candle seen through tears. Its wide belly brushed the soil with every step, leaving a trail of thick, glistening growth in its wake. Its head tilted, its smile stretched impossibly wide, gentle and sad. I tried to speak, but the sound caught in my throat. Fear? Awe? Recognition? I didn't know. The warmth inside me pressed upward, tender, reassuring, as though urging me not to fear what I saw. The creature's swollen hand lifted, dripping with golden sap, and when its fingers brushed mine, I felt soil beneath my nails. I felt damp earth breathing. I felt, for a heartbeat, what it felt. A world not of death, but of renewal built from decay. A garden made from suffering transformed. A place rumored in 1,000 fevered prayers and whispered nightmares, glimpsed for a moment through the veil of my failing humanity. Not literally real, not fully imaginary. A vision, a calling, a promise. A pulse shuddered through me, violent in its tenderness. The garden dissolved. The hab returned. The creature faded into mist. But the warmth remained, stronger, closer, more intertwined with every breath. My knees buckled. I gripped the window frame. My vision flickered. And then, in the shimmering overlap between hallucination and reality, I heard a voice. Not thunder, not words. A whisper of affection curling through my mind. Grow with me. The whisper faded, but its warmth lingered, soft as breath against my ear, sweet as damp earth rising after rain. It pulsed through my veins in slow, rolling waves that steadied my trembling limbs. I stood by the window for several minutes, gripping the metal frame until my fingers cramped, fighting the strange desire to sink into the vision again. To let that garden claim me entirely. To let its humid breath wrap around me like a shroud woven from soil and affection. But reality pressed in around me too. The manufacturum's distant thunder. The crackle of failing lumen strips. The thin, metallic taste of the recycled air. I could hear raised voices somewhere in the corridor, officers shouting, boots scrambling, the heavy drag of equipment being rushed into position. They hadn't forgotten me. The warmth inside my chest pulsed once, sharply, as if reminding me that danger remained. It felt different now, bigger, fuller. Not swollen with power, but with presence. As though the vision of the garden had fed it, rooted it deeper within me. I stepped away from the window and felt a sudden heaviness settle into my limbs. My bones ached, not painfully, but with a pressure that reminded me of soil shifting under the weight of new growth. I touched my collarbone, half expecting to feel bark where flesh should be, but my skin was still skin, warm, slick with a faint sheen that refused to dry. A knock rapped against the wall inside my skull. Not literal, not sound, a sensation, urgent, prickling warning. I froze. The warmth reacted at the same moment, compressing tightly beneath my ribs. My breath hitched. The whisper of danger pressed through my thoughts like a cold draft leaking under a door. They were coming back. My hands trembled. My mind raced, not toward escape, but toward that impossible garden. Part of me wanted to close my eyes and fall into it again, to walk the breathing paths beneath swollen trees, to feel the soft soil cradle my feet, to lose myself in a place where nothing hurt and everything decayed into life. But the world around me refused to melt so easily. The walls stayed metal. The floors stayed cold. Outside, the shouts grew louder, closer. I could hear the unmistakable clatter of flamer units being primed. Heavy tanks releasing compressed pressure, pilot igniters sparking. They intended to burn my hab out. Burn me out. A deep, instinctive fear rose inside me. My fear, not the presence's. But the warmth answered instantly with a pulse that spread up my spine and into my skull like a calming hand. It wasn't afraid. Not of fire. Not of the officers. Not of anything. It didn't see destruction the way humans did. Fire was simply change. Heat was simply nourishment. Purification was simply the prelude to growth. But I was not ready for that comfort. My heart pounded painfully. The second heartbeat beneath it fluttered, trying desperately to soothe it into rhythm. The contrast between them, my racing panic and its slow reassurance, sent a dizzying wave through my head. I staggered back toward the cot, gripping the edge for balance. My skin prickled. The air thickened. The scent of the garden crept back into my nose. Sweet rot, rich soil, blossoms splitting open. A vision crept over the corners of the room again, subtle at first, then stronger. The metal walls softened into damp growth. The floor rippled with faint green light. Vines slithered lazily along the ceiling, dripping honey-like sap that evaporated before it hit the ground. The warmth surged. The garden pressed closer. I fought it, only for a moment, only long enough to take a breath. The vision flickered, half real, half hallucination, and in the shimmering distortion between the two worlds, I saw a figure emerging from the fog. One of the round shapes from my dream. Wide belly, swaying gait, arms trailing vines instead of veins. Eyes glowing like lanterns submerged beneath swamp water. It waddled slowly toward me, almost shy, almost reverent. I realized then that the garden wasn't trying to pull me into it. It was trying to come to me. The presence inside my chest swelled with joy, so intense it felt like a physical embrace. A warm wave rolled through me, loosening my clenched jaw, softening my trembling muscles. I tried to speak, but only a thick breath escaped me. The creature lifted its swollen hand. In the real world, or the imagined one, flame units primed outside my door, officers shouting for clear lines of fire. But here, in the liminal space Nurgle's touch had opened, a garden creature reached for me with gentle, dripping fingers. "What?" I whispered, voice cracking. The creature paused. Its smile widened. Its eyes softened. And though it made no sound, I felt the answer bloom inside my skull like a flower opening its petals. Because suffering should not be carried alone. The warmth throbbed in perfect agreement. I swallowed hard, vision shaking. Outside, the flommers hissed. Inside, a garden waited for my answer. The hiss of the flommers outside my door grew louder, angry, metallic breath preparing to exhale their cleansing fire. I could hear the officers shouting over the rising pressure, their words distorted by vox grills, but sharp with fear. They were no longer a containment unit making clinical decisions. They were terrified men preparing to burn something they didn't understand. But inside the room, the air thickened with humidity, warm and fragrant. The vision of the garden swelled until it overlapped reality like a second skin over the world. The cot beneath me seemed to soften into moss. The floor glistened as if coated in dew, and the walls breathed with subtle rhythm, swelling and contracting like the slow lungs of a living organism. The creature before me, round, shuffling, its flesh split by vines and blossoms, extended its hand again. Its swollen fingers dripped golden sap that vanished into steam before it reached the floor. The glow in its eyes did not change. It waited without urgency, without force. Its patience felt eternal, as though it had been waiting for me not just now, but forever. The warmth inside my chest surged again, but this time the pulse did not soothe or comfort. It urged. It pressed upward, expanding beneath my ribs until my breath hitched in my throat. My back arched involuntarily. The presence within me pulsed with a kind of joyous intensity, like excitement, like longing, like recognition of something that lived outside my body, yet belonged to it. A soft whisper brushed the inside of my skull. Not a word, but an emotion shaped into something close to sound. "Home." I squeezed my eyes shut. "I don't belong there," I whispered, voice trembling. The warmth answered with a single, quiet throb that felt like a hand settling gently over my heart. "Not there. Here. Everywhere." I opened my eyes again. The creature's hand hovered inches from my face, dripping warmth. Not threatening, not demanding, but offering something I did not have a name for. Something that frightened me more than the flommers outside. Because there was no malice in this touch. No cruelty. Just a kind of impossible love. A rumble rolled through the floors outside. Heavy boots, shouted orders, the clang of flame units being mounted. The officers were forming a firing line. I could hear someone priming an ignition trigger, the telltale click-snap of pilot sparks leaping between coils. One deep inhale, and the entire hab would become a furnace. The warmth in my chest reacted instantly, swelling into a shield of desperate heat. I felt it rise through my lungs, tightening my throat, preparing, instinctively, to protect me again, to wrap itself around my organs, to soften the fire into something survivable. But the creature in the vision shook its head slowly, not in disapproval, in sorrow. Its swollen hand lowered to my chest, not touching, hovering, waiting, and then something inside me shifted. A slow ripple passed beneath my ribs. The second heartbeat trembled, adjusting itself, synchronizing to a rhythm I'd never felt before. A rhythm that wasn't mine. A rhythm that didn't belong to the presence inside me. A rhythm that belonged to the creature in front of me. The world tilted. My vision flickered, garden, melding like two images on a damaged screen. The creature stepped closer, its shadow spilling across my lap like thick, golden sap. Its voice, if it could be called that, rolled through my thoughts with the softness of a breath blown across warm soil. "You don't run from a garden. You bloom with it." My breath shook violently. "I'm not ready." Another pulse from within, warm, patient, aching in its compassion. "You are suffering. Let's share it. Let's make it gentle." The garden flickered sharper around me. The vines thickened. The moist heat smothered the air. The creature's hand came closer, almost brushing my chest now, so close I could feel the warmth radiating off its open palm. Outside, the officers shouted, "Ignite!" A roar of flame, surged toward my door. Inside, the creature's hand pressed forward, and the warmth beneath my ribs answered with a burst of emotion so powerful it felt like light erupting inside my lungs. The two pulses, mine and the other's, slammed into perfect sync. Heat swallowed the world. Flame at the door. Golden warmth inside. A garden reaching out. And me, caught between surrender and survival. The creature's fingers brushed my skin. The instant the creature's fingers brushed my skin, two worlds collided so violently that I couldn't breathe. Heat, real heat, exploded from the door as the flamer units ignited. A blast of fire roared into the hab, devouring oxygen in a greedy rush. The metal floor scorched beneath my palms, blistering under the intensity of the purge. But the garden pressed closer at the same moment, its warmth blooming around me like a cocoon of humid breath. The creature's touch didn't burn. It melted through my panic, smothering it with a softness I could barely comprehend. For a moment, the fire and the vision danced together in the same space, neither one dispelling the other. Flames curled around my cot, turning metal red-hot. Yet the garden's vines slithered over the same cot, cooling it with streams of golden sap. The creature's shadow overlapped the flickering light of the flames until the shapes blurred and buckled like overlapping realities fighting for the same ground. I felt the warmth inside me surge upward with sudden force, spreading through my chest like a living shield. It wasn't afraid of the fire. It embraced it, absorbed it, turning the burning air into something humid, fragrant, almost sweet. My lungs filled with smoke, but the smoke didn't choke me. It tasted like rich soil. A shockwave of heat tore across the room. I heard metal screaming as the hab door warped under the flamer blast. Officers shouted over each other, their panic slicing through the din. Maintain stream. Maintain stream. Keep the pressure steady. Subject is still inside. If it's not dead, it will be. But their voices dimmed as the garden's breath expanded around me. The creature pressed its hand fully against my chest. Not violently, not hungrily, like a parent placing a hand on a fevered child's forehead. The warmth inside me erupted into golden light behind my eyelids. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. My ribs softened under its touch, not breaking, but yielding, like stone turning to sand. A pulse shot down my spine. Another trembled through my stomach. My limbs felt heavy and fluid, as though something inside me had liquefied the bones and replaced them with a thicker, warmer substance. I gasped, but it wasn't pain. It was release. The second heartbeat inside me swelled explosively, pushing outward in sync with the creature's pulse. The pressure beneath my ribs intensified, not sharp or violent, but inevitable like something blooming. The creature leaned close, its swollen face inches from mine, dripping golden sap that evaporated in the fiery air. Its eyes, glowing with that impossible, parental tenderness, filled my vision. And I felt the whisper again. Not words, not sound, a truth pressed gently into my bones. All things rot, all things bloom, all things belong. Fire roared again, hotter this time, enough to melt the outer layer of the hab wall. A torrent of flame surged toward me. I should have died, but the warmth inside me rose like a tide, wrapping itself around my organs with a shield of soft, living heat. The fire washed over us, over me and the creature that hovered between worlds, and instead of agony, I felt only warmth. Comforting, familiar, a heat that didn't consume but embraced. The creature exhaled. Its breath smelled like rotting leaves and wildflowers bursting through soil. The world wavered. The garden surged forward, swallowing the hab entirely. Vines coiled around the flames. Flowers drank in the heat. Sap dripped from swollen blossoms. The ground beneath me softened into soil that pulsed with life. The officers' voices became nothing but distant echoes, muffled by thick fog rolling across the vision. A tender pressure tightened around my chest. The presence inside me, once curled and afraid, unfurled fully for the first time. And I felt it, not as something inside me, as something that was me, part of my breath, part of my pulse, part of my skin. The creature's massive hand cupped the back of my head. The garden grew brighter. The fire grew distant. Reality, if I still existed within it, fractured like cracked glass held together by a single trembling strand. The creature leaned down, its forehead nearly touching mine, and the whisper came again, gentler than ever, like damp petals falling against my ears. It's time to grow. My body shook. Both hearts quivered. And then, somewhere outside the vision, far away yet impossibly close, a heavy metallic thud struck the hab wall, followed by another, then another. Something worse than flommers had arrived. The pounding on the hab wall reverberated through both realities, metal shuddering in the physical world and the trembling of roots in the garden world that layered itself over my vision. Each strike shook the ground beneath me, sending ripples through the soft, pulsing soil. The vines that curled along the ceiling quivered, shedding drops of golden sap that sizzled into mist before hitting the scorched metal floor. The creature's swollen face turned toward the sound, and something in its expression changed. Not fear. These beings did not know fear the way humans did, but an unmistakable sense of mourning, as if it recognized the threat beyond the wall not as danger, but as interruption, a break in a sacred metamorphosis. The pounding came again, louder. A hydraulic whine followed, a pressurizing hiss that cut through even the humid air of the vision. Not a flamer, not a shock unit, something heavier, something meant not for cleansing or containment, but for rupture. A breach charge. I felt my stomach drop. The warmth inside me reacted instantly, curling, tightening, pressing itself closer to my heart. Its pulse fluttered with anxious energy, but no longer in panic. It wasn't afraid to die. That concept didn't apply to it, but it feared what would happen to me. It feared interruption. It feared separation from the fragile vessel it had chosen. Another slam shook the wall. Metal buckled. Dust shook loose from the ceiling. The officers shouted orders in the hall, their voices barely audible over the hydraulic hiss. But the creature before me brought its swollen, sap-dripping hand to my cheek. The garden dimmed around the edges, not fading but receding like a curtain drawn back to reveal something deeper, layers behind layers, growth behind growth. The creature's glowing eyes softened, and I felt a presence behind them, vast and ancient, like a forest's memory moving through a single leaf. It pressed its forehead to mine, warm, wet, alive. The contact tore a gas from my throat. Golden sap smeared across my skin, burning and soothing at once. My vision blurred. The warmth beneath my ribs expanded until it filled every inch of me, my lungs, my throat, my skull. A tidal bloom that pushed me past the brink of self. For a moment, I saw nothing but green. Green that pulsed. Green that breathed. Green that whispered of eternity wrapped in rot and rebirth. The creature exhaled, and its breath slid down my spine like a slow-moving river of warmth. I heard a soft murmur. Not words, but something with the shape of meaning. We are not ending. We are beginning. My knees buckled. The cot behind me dissolved into moss. The walls melted into vines. The fire vanished into sweet-smelling fog. I fell forward into the creature's arms, arms that felt like thick branches wrapped in swollen flesh. And then, the breach charge detonated. Reality slammed into me like a hammer. The garden shattered for an instant, fracturing into shards of green light that scattered through my mind like sparks. The blast tore through the hab door, ripping it from its hinges and sending molten metal across the floor. I felt the shockwave hit my body, a crushing force that should have obliterated my bones. But the warmth surged again, massive, all-consuming, wrapping around my insides like a cocoon of thick, living heat. The pressure softened. The pain dissolved. My ears rang, but the ringing harmonized with the steady pulse beneath my ribs. Vines burst across the room where the blast hit the vision, their roots splitting the metal floor in phantom echoes of an impossible world. But the garden had been weakened, its presence flickering, shimmering, unable to fully anchor itself against such violent intrusion. The creature stepped back, Its eyes dimmed. Its form trembled like fog in a storm. A deep sadness rolled through the room. Not disappointment in me. Sorrow for the inevitability of interruption. Behind the creature, I saw a path, the same path from the earlier dream. Twisted trees lining it. Blossoms shedding petals that glowed faintly in the dim air. A path not meant for mortals. A path no human could walk without surrendering everything that made them mortal. The creature touched my chest one final time. Its hand left a burning imprint of golden warmth, sinking into my flesh. The vision flickered. The creature's outline dissolved. The garden withdrew like water pulled back into deep soil. And the last thing I saw before the world collapsed back into flames and metal was its smile. Sad, proud, hopeful. When reality snapped into full clarity again, officers flooded into the room. Smoke stung my eyes. The floor burned beneath me. The breach team leveled their weapons. And I, alive, trembling, changed. Felt the warmth beneath my ribs pulse once, slowly. A final message. We will finish this bloom. Chapter 5, Becoming the Plaguebearer. The room swam in heat and smoke. The breach team poured in through the ruined doorway, their armor outlined by the glow of molten metal, visors gleaming like cold, expressionless eyes. They moved with purpose, sweeping, clearing, shouting orders over the hiss of fire-suppressant foam, flooding the corridor behind them. But their steps faltered when they saw me, still standing, shaking, soaked in golden sheen, alive when I shouldn't have been. One officer aimed a weapon I didn't recognize. A heavy, boxy thing with a vented barrel and warning sigils etched along its casing. Something experimental. Something meant not to kill, but to erase. Don't let it breathe, someone shouted. But the warmth inside me had already begun to stir again, pushing upward from the hollow beneath my lungs like a slow, deliberate tide. It no longer trembled. It no longer curled inward. It rose with certainty, with purpose, with a depth of emotion I could barely hold inside my ribcage. I pressed a hand to my sternum, not to stop it, but to feel it, because I understood now. The garden had not been a place, not a realm, not a literal landscape of vines and decay. It had been a revelation, a way of seeing the world through a lens of transformation, a glimpse into a truth whispered by fever, by gift, by something caring enough to reshape me. The creature's departure had not severed the connection. It had deepened it, rooted it. I felt that truth expand within me now, tender, patient, impossibly vast. A presence that had watched me from the moment the first cough rattled my lungs. A presence that had held me when the fever took me. A presence that had guided my fear into surrender and my surrender into acceptance. The officer with the heavy weapon steadied his stance. Subject is still mobile. Prepare paralysis burst. My breath caught. The warmth surged. For a moment, it felt as though my entire ribcage softened, flexing outward like the thin bark of a sapling bending in a storm. Heat seeped into my limbs, thick and syrup-like. My vision blurred. The room tilted on a slow axis. The officers appeared smaller, muffled by a haze that smelled of soil and smoke and budding flowers. The presence inside me whispered, not with words, but with completeness. Don't be afraid. My fingers tingled. My jaw loosened. My legs wobbled. The officer squeezed the trigger. A burst of crackling energy shot toward me. White, crackling with arcs of static, leaving a trail of ozone in its wake. It struck my chest and ricocheted through my nerves like shards of electricity, enough to drop a charging Ogren in a single hit. My body lurched backward, but didn't fall. The warmth rose like a shield, not blocking the energy, not resisting it, but absorbing it into the soft, expanding glow that filled my lungs. Pain shimmered for a heartbeat, then broke apart like ash scattered over water. The officer stumbled back a step. What? What is stabilizing it? It's resisting neural disruption. No, look at its skin. I looked too. The sheen across my collarbone had changed. It wasn't fluid anymore. It was texture. Soft, velvety patches spreading across my chest, greenish, dappled, threaded with faint golden veins like roots glowing beneath thin skin. They pulsed in gentle rhythm with a second heartbeat inside me. Another wave of dizziness hit me. I grabbed the wall, but my fingers slid across it like the surface was too smooth. No, not smooth. My fingertips left faint smears of amber that glistened before slowly thickening into tiny beads. My breathing steadied, but not in a human pattern. Draw in. Pause. Expand. Exhale like mist rolling over warm soil. The officers panicked. Get the suppressant foam. It's mutating fast. Don't inhale anything. Seal your filters. But their voices sounded distant. The warmth inside me pulsed with slow, assured tenderness, as though comforting a frightened animal. My knees buckled again, but this time a thick wave of heat caught me before I fell, holding me upright from within. My skin crawled with gentle movement, not tearing, not breaking, but stretching. My breath thickened. My heartbeat shifted again, once, twice, finding a new rhythm that resonated deeper, slower, more certain. Something inside me whispered, "Let yourself grow." The officers shouted again, their weapons rising. My skin shimmered. My breath steadied. The warmth pressed outward, and a soft, wet crackle rolled through my chest. My ribs were changing. The crackle inside my ribs was soft, subtle enough that, at first, I mistook it for a breath catching in my throat. But then it came again, clearer this time, a delicate sound like sap splitting through soft bark. Not violent, not painful, a stretch, a yielding. The quietest possible sound of a boundary giving way so something else could emerge. My hands trembled as I pressed them to my chest. The bones beneath didn't feel rigid anymore. They felt warm, flexible, alive. The presence inside me pulsed, not with urgency or hunger, but with encouragement, gentle, patient, endlessly compassionate. It wasn't forcing the change. It was asking for permission to continue. And the terrifying part was how natural that permission felt. How easily my mind wrapped around the idea that my body was no longer just mine. That I wasn't losing myself, but offering myself. A beginning, not an ending. The breach team didn't see it that way. They saw my trembling posture, the shimmering fluid across my skin, the subtle glow beneath my collarbone, and their fear sharpened into something desperate enough to choke the air. "Deploying suppressant," one of them shouted. A blast of thick gray foam surged across the floor, spreading in heavy waves, designed to smother fire, biological agents, and anything else the Imperium deemed too dangerous to leave breathing. The foam hissed as it advanced, crawling toward me. The warmth inside me reacted instantly, not with hostility, with grief. A low pulse radiated outward from my chest, tinged with sorrow. I felt its sadness wash through me like warm water, softening the edges of my panic until my shoulders slumped in understanding. It wasn't mourning the suppressant. It was mourning the people using it. Their fear, their misunderstanding, their uncomplicated belief that this transformation was only corruption, only horror, only a threat to be extinguished. They had never felt the garden. They had never seen that vision of renewal built from ruin. They did not know that suffering could be softened. Another crackle rippled under my ribs. This time I gasped. The officers tightened their grip on their weapons. Something beneath my sternum pushed outward, not enough to break skin, but enough for me to feel a tremor spread through my entire torso. My breath wavered, thickening into warm vapor. The air around me swirled with a faint golden haze. My fingers numbed, tingled, and warmed again, and the foam reached my boots. I braced myself, expecting coldness, harshness, burning chemicals. Instead, the suppressant touched my skin and melted, literally melted. The gray foam collapsed into a puddle of thin, translucent liquid that steamed on contact with the sheen covering my ankles. It didn't hiss in pain or spark like acid meeting resistance. It simply dissolved as though it recognized the transformation already happening inside me and chose not to interfere. The officers stared. What is it doing? It neutralized the suppressant. No biological agent does that, none. The warmth inside me pulsed once in what felt like apology. I inhaled. My breath rattled, thick with warmth. My lungs expanded more deeply than they had any right to. My spine arched, a soft tremor spreading into my arms. I felt the subtle shift again, the stretch of organs adjusting, the subtle liquefying of barriers, the slow emergence of something deeper than human biology. I exhaled, and a cloud of warm, golden mist trailed from my lips. The officers recoiled. Mask integrity now. Full seals. One shouted in panic, clutching his visor. Do not inhale that. Do not. But the mist wasn't drifting toward them. It drifted toward me, curling back into my skin, returning to where it belonged, like breath returning to lungs. My body shook. A soft groan escaped my throat, not from pain, but from the overwhelming sensation of everything shifting into place inside me. Something warm and pliant pressed upward beneath my sternum again. My belly tightened, softened, swelled the slightest fraction. The faintest outline of something rounded pushed beneath the flesh near my ribs. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't sick. I was forming. The presence inside me whispered a single feeling, a truth delivered through warmth. Don't resist. You're safe. Another crack, a gentle one, rippled across my ribcage. The officers panicked, stumbling back. One shouted, It's birthing something. But they were wrong. Nothing was being born from me. Something was being born into me. My vision blurred with humid light. The warmth inside me pressed outward. Slow, steady, loving. And my ribs responded with pliant acceptance. I wasn't transforming into something separate. I was transforming into something shared. A vessel, a chorus, a bloom. The officers fired again. I barely felt the impact, because the presence inside me had grown too strong, too close, too intertwined. And as another warm pulse tore through my chest, I realized something in my voice was changing too, because when I tried to speak, my breath carried a second voice behind it. The second voice wasn't loud. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't even separate. It emerged through my breath, woven into the exhale, layered beneath my words like a harmony waiting patiently behind a melody. A soft, resonant undertone that vibrated through my teeth and down my spine, warm and velvety, almost tender. When I opened my mouth, the officers heard only a ragged gasp. But I heard more. I heard a voice shaped from warmth. A voice that pulsed in rhythm with the second heartbeat. A voice that wasn't mine, yet felt as natural as breath. The sound startled me so deeply that my knees wobbled again. My hand shot to my throat, fingers pressing against skin that felt thicker, softer, warm to the point of fever. Under my fingertips, I felt subtle movement, tiny pulses traveling along new, delicate pathways beneath my flesh, as if vessels had grown overnight to carry something thicker than blood. The officers saw my reaction and mistook it for pain. One raised his weapon. The other braced the barrel with both hands, steadying his aim. It's vocalizing, he warned. Possible psychic component. Take it down. Psychic? No, there was nothing psychic here. No warp surge. No demonic mind speaking into mine. What I heard was emotional, biological, intimate, like a second soul pressing its face against the inside of my skin and humming into my breath. The warmth pulsed softly, as if to reassure me, and my voice, our voice, echoed with the faintest note of comfort. It's all right, I tried to say, but the sound that came out was strange. Half my voice, half the soft, resonant vibration beneath it. The officers stepped back. Emperor preserve us, one whispered. I should have felt shame, horror, panic. Instead, I felt a wave of warmth roll through me. Gentle, patient, proud, softening every sharp edge of fear. Not domination, not force, an embrace. The presence inside me leaned into my breath, deepening the resonance. Not a voice, a blessing of sound. But the officers saw only mutation. One fired. The impact staggered me, knocking my shoulder against the scorched wall. I felt the kinetic force travel through muscle and into the warmth that cushioned my bones. It wasn't painless, it was pressure, a dull thud, but it didn't break anything, didn't pierce anything. The bullet hit something soft but unyielding beneath the skin and simply stopped. A golden trickle slid from the wound. The warmth pulsed with mild discomfort. Nothing more. Another shot followed. Another dull thud. Another breath that left my mouth layered with two voices instead of one. The officer's fear sharpened. It's hardening. Its flesh is recomposing. No suppressant. No round is working. We need to fall back. But even as they shouted, another change rippled through me. The golden sheen along my collarbone thickened. The patch spread down my chest in a slow, creeping bloom. The veins beneath my skin pulsed with greenish light. My breath grew deeper, warmer, leaving faint curls of fragrant vapor as it escaped my lips. The second heartbeat, steady, confident, patient, beat stronger. And for the first time, I felt something shift inside my skull. Not a hallucination, not a voice, a memory that wasn't mine. Fog-covered soil, a distant, warm chuckle, a swollen hand lifting a ruined flower and coaxing new petals from it. A sense of peace so profound it brought tears to my eyes. The officers took another step back. Containment is lost, one whispered. It's already crossed the threshold. Crossed the threshold. Yes, I felt that too. Not just physically, emotionally, spiritually, quietly. A point where the body stops resisting what the soul has already welcomed. I try to speak again, to tell them to stop, to tell them I meant no harm. But when I opened my mouth, the sound that came out wasn't human. It wasn't monstrous either. It was a low, guttural resonance, a soft, vibrating hum, like the first note of a choir made of warm rot and blooming soil. Beautiful, terrifying, gentle. My voice cracked. A ripple of golden vapor rolled from my throat. The warmth inside me answered the vibration with a pulse of joy. And I realized it wasn't speaking through me. It was speaking with me. We were merging, becoming a single voice, a single breath, a single being. The officers stumbled back in panic, tripping over the melted foam. My ribs softened again. My chest swelled. My breath thickened in a sweet vapor. The warmth rose, filling my throat. And the second voice, soft, resonant, inevitable, began to form its first true word. The word forming in my throat was not shaped by a human tongue. It wasn't syllables or breath or sound. It was feeling, given vibration and warmth. A note older than my bones, rising slowly from the place where the second heartbeat now pulsed with calm certainty. My throat quivered. My jaw loosened. A tenderness spread up my neck as if unseen fingers traced the line of my spine. I felt it gather there, in my breath, in the hollow of my chest, in the soft places my body had surrendered to change. A single tone, a beginning. But before it could leave my lips, the officers scrambled into a tighter formation. Their fear had congealed into something sharper. Desperation, the kind that comes just before a breaking point. The one with the heavy weapon jammed a new charge into the recoil chamber. Another switch to a different setting on his rifle, something meant to stun an entire sublevel. "Don't let it vocalize," one shouted. But I already had. The resonance left me not as sound, but as a wave. Warm, soft, gentle, brushing through the air like a breeze through tall grass. It didn't strike them. It didn't harm them. It didn't even reach them. It curled back toward me, returning like a petal falling from a blossom. Yet they reacted as if a demon had torn through the veil. One stumbled back. Another clenched a hand over his respirator. A third whispered a prayer through trembling lips. Their fear was so sharp it cut through the warm haze surrounding me, reminding me, for a single, painful heartbeat, of what I had been. A worker, a man, a mortal trying to survive the indifferent machinery of the Imperium. A life where pain was constant and hope was rationed like air. And that memory, my memory, collided with the warmth's growing certainty inside me. For the first time, the presence hesitated, not in its transformation, in its emotion. It felt my doubt, and it answered with a pulse so soft it broke something loose behind my eyes. The officers advanced again. Now, while it's unstable, they weren't wrong. I was unstable, not physically. My body was changing with effortless grace. every shift cushioned by warmth. Not mentally. The warmth held my thoughts steady, cradled, soothed. But emotionally, I hung between two worlds, each tugging at me with equal force. One world was fire and fear and the cold inevitability of imperial judgment. The other was warmth and soil and a promise that no suffering needed to be carried alone. A ripple passed beneath my skin. So sudden and intense I gasped aloud. My ribs stretched outward another fraction. A new softness formed beneath my sternum. The golden sheen thickened into a coat that hummed as it pulsed. The officers saw it. Emperor, its chest, its shape is changing. Get the last charge. But their voices blurred again, because the warmth inside me pressed upward one more time, and I felt it, truly felt it, touch my heartbeat. Not the second one, my original one. A single moment of contact, a single shared rhythm, a single emotional truth passed between us. You don't have to let go. You can hold both. You can be both. My knees buckled. I dropped to one hand, bracing myself on the molten floor. Steam rose from my palm. I barely felt it. My breath came in thick clouds of golden vapor. The scent of wet earth filled my lungs. And the warmth rose again, not trying to take me, not trying to consume me, but trying to join me. My throat opened. The second voice unfurled, and the word finally formed. Not a command, not a threat, a name, something like a memory of a father-shaped shadow. Something like the first syllable of a prayer said by someone who had never known love until now. But just as the word left my lips, a new sound tore through the room. Not a weapon, not a voice. A heavy, metallic thud that shook the walls. All the officers froze. A deeper thud followed, and another, and another. Footsteps, but not human ones. Too heavy, too deliberate, too disciplined. The officers turned toward the ruined doorway in horror. The Adeptus Custodes, one whispered. No, they wouldn't be here. Then who? Another thunderous step cut him off. The warmth inside my chest froze. Not in fear, in recognition. Something powerful had entered the Hablock. Something the Imperium sent only when they suspected a threat far greater than a contagion. I pulled in a ragged breath. The second voice faltered. A shadow fell across the doorway, massive and gold-lit through the smoke. Whatever had come for me wasn't afraid of plague, or mutation, or warmth. It had come for judgment. The silhouette that filled the doorway was too large to be a normal officer, too tall to be a worker, too deliberate to be a panicked enforcer. The frame glowed faintly gold through the smoke, not the radiant burnished brilliance of the Adeptus Custodes, but the dulled, utilitarian gold of reinforced hazard armor used by elite purge units. Heavy plating designed for one task, neutralizing what ordinary containment teams could not. 3 visors glowed behind the first figure, then 4, then 6, a full unit, all armed, all silent, all waiting for the first to step inside. The warmth inside my chest did not recoil. It did not panic. It only pressed deeper into my ribs, holding still, listening, as if sensing that something profound stood on the threshold. The officers already in the room broke formation immediately. Stand down, one stammered, stumbling backward. This contamination is beyond local protocol. We lose jurisdiction here. The golden helmeted figure took a single step into the room. Every officer fell quiet. Even the flames seemed to hush. A voice emerged from behind the figure's sealed helm. Low, modulated, unreadable. Remove yourselves, it ordered. The breach team obeyed instantly, retreating into the corridor like insects fleeing sunlight. Their fear left the air trembling. Then the gold-armored figure turned toward me. I could not see its eyes. I could not read its expression. But something about the way it regarded me, head slightly tilted, shoulders squared, breathing methodical, sent a cold ripple down my spine. This one was not afraid, not confused, not panicked by mutation. This one had come expecting to find what I had become. My breath hitched, thick and humid. The warmth inside me pulsed gently, sensing my fear, but it did not grow or retreat. It held steady like a quiet hand on my shoulder. The golden figure walked closer. Each step shook the floor with the weight of reinforced plating. Each step felt like a verdict advancing. I rose to my feet slowly, not to challenge, not to escape, simply because something inside me refused to meet judgment on my knees. My legs trembled, but the warmth steadied them. My skin shimmered under the dim light. Steam rose from my breath. The golden sheen along my chest pulsed like a second life glowing beneath flesh. I opened my mouth to speak, to explain, to plead, to warn. I didn't know, but instead of words, a soft, resonant hum emerged. That second voice, calm and gentle, curling into the air like golden vapor. The figure paused, its visor angled. It studied me with slow, measured precision, as one might observe a specimen on the edge of metamorphosis. Then it spoke again. "You are aware," it said. Its voice carried no accusation, no disgust, no alarm, just certainty. "You are aware of what grows within you." The warmth inside me pulsed in answer. And for the first time, I understood its emotion clearly enough to feel it in my bones. Pride, not arrogance, not triumph. The quiet, fragile pride of something that had been alone for too long, now finding harmony in another heart. I swallowed hard. My throat vibrated with that strange dual tone. "Yes," I whispered. The figure stepped closer. The warmth inside me steadied. Listened. Waited. The purge unit raised a gauntlet hand. Not to strike, not to fire, but to observe the golden sheen spreading across my collarbone. For a moment, neither of us moved. The smoke curled. The molten floor hissed. The second heartbeat throbbed like a drumbeat beneath my sternum. Then the figure said something unexpected, something I could not have imagined in my fevered nightmares or garden visions. "You still possess yourself," it said. I blinked. The warmth inside me pulsed, confused. "You are changing," the figure continued, "but you have not been erased." I didn't understand. "Then what happens now?" The visor lifted a fraction, as though the figure were looking straight through me. "That depends," it said softly, "on whether you let go, or whether you remain." The warmth inside me pressed upward, tender and terrified, as if begging for my answer before I could even form it. My fingers curled against my chest. I felt the softened ribs, the new warmth pulsing like a child, clinging to my heartbeat. Two worlds waited, two futures, two selves. The golden figure took one final step, smoke parting around him. "Decide," he said. The warmth inside me whispered, a pulse, a plea, a blossoming, and my human heart answered with its own trembling beat. Between them, I felt the truth. Becoming wasn't a single moment. It was a choice, a surrender, a bloom. The figure's gauntlet lowered to my chest. The warmth rose to meet it. And I, caught between fear and love, opened my mouth to speak my final choice.